Okay. Well, you ready to get started? Do you want to give these people a little more time to hop in? Totally up to you.
I mean,
and I forgot to ask you, how long do you want to go on with this? Again, totally up to you.
I have
free
tons of streams that last like 8 hours, so like I could care less. You know what I mean?
Okay, let's do it. So just getting started. Scott, thanks so much for coming around. Really appreciate it. Why don't we start by you giving these people an intro into your channel, what you do, what you're about, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so my name is Scott from Fabian Liberty. We are a duo stream of two anarcho-capitalists. You may see me on a lot of debate panels and stuff. I do a lot of Prime Kazoo, Hippy Dippy, other stuff like that. But on our own channel, we just tend to do news reactions and stuff. We don't do the drama streams, right? We do our best to avoid one streamer getting mad at another streamer or something on Twitch. YouTube is mostly a pet project, but we are considering uploading to YouTube clips and stuff a little bit more as we get a little more popular. But for the most part, we're just there to spread libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism and occasionally meme. So that's kind of the thing. I am by no means an expert in anarcho-capitalism. I would say that first and foremost. There are plenty of libertarian and anarcho-capitalist thinkers from, the Mises Institute or, people like David Friedman or Hoppe, right, that are really big theory heads. However, I have found, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, about 10% of people come to our ideology through libertarianism. And of the 90% remaining, about half of them do it because they're edgy teenagers that want to piss people off. And the other half do it because they're really into economics. And so our group has a really, really bad problem with messaging. And I tend to be somebody that is able to explain these ideas in a way that normies get it or can speak to people, as opposed to being super what Dave Smith might call weaponized autism in explaining these ideas. So I guess that's why I'm here. Because I do understand these ideas, at least to some degree, but I would like to preface this conversation and this Q&A with a little bit of a thought experiment. Imagine everyone was living under a monarchy, and you were the first person to decide that you think you were James Madison, but instead of drafting the Constitution and bringing it to America, everyone was living under a monarchy, and then people asked you questions about how a supposed constitutional republic like America might work. That is kind of a similar position I'm in here. So if I don't have an answer for everything, I apologize. I'll do my best to answer or point you to resources, but we just as easily could be in a situation where, I'm having to engage in a lot of hypotheticals about something that really hasn't been tried out. And so I'll do my best. And I apologize if I'm not enough of a theory head to answer the questions, but I do pretty well, and I kind of know what I'm talking about.
Well, I think you're way more humble than you need to be. We will get started. The first question is going to be from my boy Damnation. The question is, what are your thoughts on homeschool co-ops to reduce the intrusion of the government on parents choosing how their children are taught?
So it depends on what you mean by homeschool co-op, right? I think the Mormons and the Amish and the Mennonites have done a really good job, I think, in homeschooling their children. I think the Mormons discovered a lot of really cool things. I think, 20, 30 years ago, homeschooling was largely detrimental in a lot of ways, because there was not a lot of socialization that was occurring. Right? Because I think everyone knows that what they want is a good education for their children. And while I fucking hate public school system, and in many ways the private school system is hardly that much better, but it is better. Homeschooling often for a long period of time didn't have that socialization that was necessary. And the Mormons kind of figured out, like, okay, we're gonna collectivize as a community. We're gonna engage in some mutual aid here. We're gonna set up companies, right? Because there's kind of two types of Mormons. You have the Mormons that have like 10, 15 kids, and then you have the Mitt Romney Mormons that are like pretty educated. like really well socioeconomic status, right? And so they figured out that, we need to create rec sports, and we need to create, more church groups to get the kids speaking to each other. And then they actually eventually, separated their churches for young people that were single, like 18 to 20, right? So this transition into society and this additional levels of socialization are great. I'm always going to be for agorism, but I do think when speaking about children, the concern of children should probably come first before your political ideology does, maybe. In terms of like getting into the specifics of like the philosophy of things, I would need more, pointed questions to understand what it might be that I agree or disagree with.
Damnation is willing to speak, so Damnation, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, actually, dude, you hit like when you were talking about the concept of like creating private entities that a group of parents gets together and then builds buys a piece of property and works in a full co-op concept where they're like, okay, so we own all of this organization, and we get to decide the curriculum, the after school activities, and it's kind of a collectivized situation. You basically hit exactly what I kind of was like concocting in my head of how to handle that, because my main goal is to figure out a way to get the government out of as much of our lives as humanly possible, right?
Right.
And that was one of the, like, this is just something I recently saw from a couple different YouTube streamers, that he basically said he was the one teaching his kids about the Constitution, and he's a lawyer in his local co-op, his homeschool co-op. And I was like, bro, holy shit, we could expand this out to the idea of like every public school system ever has just a group of parents that come together and offer a certain amount of their money, like they do with taxes.
Thanks for the follow, Black Currant Juice.
And then we just get them all out of the public school system. And I was just like, bro, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's agorism 101. Now, I would say one thing, just to tangent a little bit when it comes to education. If anybody is interested in kind of, there's a lot of different resources on anarchist education and, anarchist pedagogy, but my personal favorite is Stirner's essay on critical pedagogy. I can't remember the name of it currently, but I think one of the failures we have had as a society in the education of our children is that we have educated our children under a school system that is designed to make them competent workers. That was, the anti-communist movement created the guidance counselor situation to try and funnel children into college as a means of keeping up with communist nations in their education. But what I think is far more important is teaching children philosophy, teaching children how to think, teaching children how to research. And instead, what we're teaching children is what to believe. We're teaching prescriptive values and a prescriptive education. So this happened, and this is the history of the world. This is how things are done. This is how you should read this book. And instead, I think we should be teaching people philosophy and how to be free and how to think for themselves, how to read research, right? Because I think if you teach children how to think and how to learn and how to grow, then you can let their proclivities in college and in life allow them to go deeper into what it is that interests them. And instead, we have this very kind of, copy and paste, everyone needs to know these things, right? Like it's kind of a stupid meme, but like we're teaching children that like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, instead of like how to read a piece of research so that they can sift through bullshit information when it's given to them.
Awesome, dude. Like it was, you actually answered my question before I actually popped onto VC, but yeah, like with the expansion and the explanation of it was really good.
Children a lot.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Next question is gonna be from Base Maker. The question is simple: what's your academic background?
My credentials. They're not much to speak of. I have an associate's degree in economics. I have a double major in my undergrad in psychology and sociology, and I have like 29 grad school credits. Kind of dropped out of grad school in counseling, not because I had poor grades or anything, but COVID hit, and I need to pay a substantial amount of child support. And so I can't really afford to continue my counseling, which would require me to do internships. So mostly counseling and psychology. My grandmother is a sociologist, so I kind of grew up debating and stuff like that. But yeah, no, it's mostly self-taught when it comes to political philosophy.
Great. Okay. So next question is from Tylenol. The question is, what is the best way to preserve one's liberty in the absence of general government regulations?
That's a really difficult question. I thought I was going to get a lot of meme questions. That's a good one. So, what is the best way to preserve your own liberty in the absence of government what?
In the absence of general government regulations.
So I would say number one would be social capital, I think. Getting involved with other people. Despite being a very individualist movement, individual responsibility is great and all. And, self-defense and things like that. All those things are good, right? But it really depends upon where you're living, right? Are you in Chiron, Mexico? In an anarchist community? Are you in an anarcho-mutualist society? Are you in an anarcho-capitalist society? All those things like change the kind of the rules of the game, like what type of society you're living in that is anarchist, because there's a lot of different forms of anarchism. I would say, though, that the biggest thing you can do to preserve yourself is to be engaged with your community. No man is an island. Even though we believe in individualism and individual sovereignty, you need social capital. Bowling Alone by, I believe, Robert Putnam, really helps explain how that is one of the most important and underlooked kind of measurements within sociology, and why we so desperately need it for crime, for health, for community health and things like that, right? So what's going to happen to your grandmother when there's no Medicare or Medicaid, right? Well, you need to take care of your grandmother, or your grandmother needs to learn to invest for herself. But either way, you need to be more of a community. You need to be engaged with possibly a church or a group, right? You need to be involved with sports. You need to know who the fuck your neighbors are. So I think the best way to preserve individual liberty is to be actively involved with your community and social organizations, so that you can know what's going on in your community and so that you can help each other out. Because without a social safety net and without government regulations, you could be rolled over by a strong institution or someone with more power than you. But if you're in a strong union and you're in a strong church and you know who your neighbors are and you take care of your family, you will be far less likely to have some invading force that could take away your liberties affect you in such a way.
Great answer. Okay. I have a question, actually, before we move on to these lame user questions. My question is, so how did you, because most people, they interact with their friends or their family, their community, with what's in the media. And so they end up somewhere, on the liberal spectrum, somewhere there. And you are way out of that spectrum. I think you're way off to the side. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. But yeah, I'm curious as to how you got there. Right, because anytime I speak to someone who's a communist or an anarchist or an Ancap or some far something, right? Mm-hmm. It's usually not a simple journey to get there, right? So I'm just kind of curious to what your journey to this belief system is.
So from a very young age, I was deeply involved in politics. My mom took me as a baby in a stroller to, in 92, as a toddler, I guess, not a baby, but took me as a baby to go work the Clinton campaign. Right. So my family was super politically active and educated. Not my stepfather so much, but my mother was extremely active. And I started off mostly in the Democratic Socialist area, I would say, as a teenager. And I was not per se an anti-capitalist per se, but a very politically involved individual. And I would say there was a couple of things that happened to me in my life. The first of which was my great-great aunt was mentally challenged. or intellectually disabled, whatever term you want to use, right? She was, when my great grandmother died, she had to be put in a home because nobody could take care of her needs at home. And when she was put in that home, she was mistreated to the point where she died from malnutrition and bed sores, which is basically her body rotted to death and she starved to death. It was really upsetting It was really, really upsetting for my family. And we were buried in court for 2 years. And we won our court case and won a $16 million lawsuit. However, we won a lawsuit against a corporation that was bankrupt. We were buried in so much paperwork, and our first lawyer was actually bought off. And what ended up happening was they never even showed up to court. And the judge gave us not only the lawsuit, knowing that gave us the victory, knowing that we would never see a dollar, but also gave us a 10-year gag order, making it illegal for us to talk to the media. That was kind of the first thing that drove me into socialism and hating corporations. And then I grew. I got a little older. Some other, a family member, we'll say, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder because he had a large crack problem, and was stabbed a couple of times and then stabbed his girlfriend to death. He was a very violent person. He belongs in prison. But I saw prosecutorial misconduct firsthand. I saw them lie. I saw things being thrown out of court that were not that way. And the reason is because he was a white man in Memphis who murdered a black woman. And the judge didn't want to be seen as being lenient on a white person murdering a black person, and made the case about his racism, which he never was racist. It was his girlfriend. I saw a lot of the lies of the system. And so I kind of fell out of favor in a way, but I was kind of politically homeless. I joined the military, and kind of the third incident occurred. And the third incident was we were doing post-deployment health reassessments, which is basically 90 days after soldiers get back from their deployment, they go through another medical screening. And I was a part of that process to catch things that we didn't catch before, right? So they get home, they're all happy. 90 days later, it's like, hey, my wife's been cheating on me and I'm depressed. Or like, hey, I thought my knee was fine, but actually I have a pretty bad knee injury from being overseas, et cetera, et cetera. And so in this process, there was some soldiers on the airfield, and we found, I want to say 12 or 13 soldiers with serious medical conditions, ranging from one person had a systolic blood pressure of over 160. One person had shin splints so bad that their legs looked like spider webs under an x-ray, right? And what we found was that a doctor was accusing every soldier that came in of malingering and complaining, and was refusing to give them profiles and refusing to let them actually go to the hospital. It was extremely serious violation of the Hippocratic Oath, and extremely terrible way to treat soldiers that just got back from a deployment in Kandahar. So we reported it up the chain of command, myself and a nurse practitioner, sorry. And then eventually, nothing happened. So we decided we were going to report it to the Inspector General's office. We did so. And an NCO from the IG's office came to me as a friend, because we were in the same building. Long story, but we worked in the same building. We smoked together. And he said, hey, look, you need to drop that report and let me throw it in the trash, because that doctor is friends with the post general. And this isn't going to go anywhere, and you're going to end up getting kicked out of the army, and you're going to get a dishonorable discharge. Like, that's just how the game is played, and you're not going to win this fight. It's one of the biggest regrets of my life, but I said okay. And I told the nurse practitioner, and she said okay, and we let it go. And that doctor is still mistreating soldiers to this day, probably. Those three things really drove my anti-corporate socialist tendencies and allowed me to see how horrendous the state is. And they drove me towards libertarianism. and Minarchism. I did not really become a full-blown anarcho-capitalist until reading a lot more of the literature and defending the ideas until I realized that it was a possibility. And that was that's the full journey, I guess, mine plus or minus some details.
Wow. Thank you very much for getting into that. Since a lot of that was really personal for you, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Next question is going to be from Kennedy. Kennedy,
hey,
whenever
Doobie.
you're ready.
Okay, my apologies. A great story, by the way. I enjoyed it. So I just joined this political server recently. I don't know much about you. Could maybe you do like a quick explanation of your political views, or where you stand? Are you more so libertarian, I assume, or?
I'm an anarcho-capitalist.
Okay, that's cool. And like you have a YouTube and a Twitch and stuff that I could follow.
Yeah. After we get done with the Q&A or whatever, I'll whatever chat you want me to throw it in, I'll throw my Twitch and my my YouTube. I'm just now starting to do highlights. I occasionally do like an FAQ video or something. It's my YouTube is kind of more of like a pet project when I have extra time. I'm primarily a Twitch streamer. So yeah, and you can also join our Discord. Our Discord is I'll link the Discord as well. It's full of a lot of smart, good people, and I do a pretty good job of keeping it clean, and there's a lot of philosophy, and you can talk to other Ancaps. There's objectivists and right-wingers, and the occasional commie comes in, and we love them too.
Yeah, for sure. You seem very well-spoken. I appreciate the time that you get me to speak. But one of my conversations I want to bring up about the vaccines. I assume you're U.S. based, correct?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think about the vaccines going on right now, the mandates, etc.?
So that is an incredibly complicated question.
Yeah, very true. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to load it like that.
I am probably known as one of the more anti-vax people on Twitch.
Okay.
Now, let me preface that with two things. Number one, as an anarcho-capitalist, I think it's important to understand that our philosophy is often, how do I say this?
What is that? I'm sorry to interrupt. What is that? What did you say? Anarcho-capitalist?
I'll read the definition that I have for you, because it's pretty.
It seems like it's counterproductive, right?
Well, obviously, I wouldn't agree with that.
I mean, the definition, it seems.
Right. Well, that's a longer debate. But anarcho-capitalism, I'll just read the definition for you, modified slightly by me. But anarcho-capitalism is a political philosophy and economic theory that advocates the elimination of the state in favor of a system of private property enforced by private agencies, free markets, and the right libertarian interpretation of self-ownership, which extends the concept to include control of private property as part of the self. Historically, anarcho-capitalism, I would say, is derived from, obviously, we would claim to be derived from the anarcho-mutualists and first anarchist Proudhon. But when the Blanquists and the Bakunin split with Sade, which we do not have Sade's writings because he was murdered at the First International and killed by communists and anarcho-communists, or at the time they would be called anarcho-syndicalists, because Kropotkin and Malatesta and stuff like that they're not a thing at this time, right? And then in the American vein, we follow, in many ways, the ideas of Josiah Warren, Voltairine de Cleyre, Benjamin Tucker, Lysander Spooner, the anarcho-individual. These are all the anarcho-individualists.
Okay. Can you, I don't know these people, though. Can you kind of explain it, nomenclature, like a normal term? Like, you're throwing out these names. Unfortunately, I don't know them. I'm just trying to understand the concept of it. What is the basic concept?
The basic concept is that we believe that all interactions should be voluntary, that people should not be coerced or forced into doing anything, and that individual sovereignty is the highest ideal, and it is not a preference for us, but instead a principle, a moral principle, and anything that goes against the individual sovereignty or the individual liberty of a person is morally wrong.
That's I'd love to have debate with you with that, because I mean, that'd probably be a really good debate between me and you, just to even understand and boil it down. But
maybe sometime, who knows?
Sure, yeah, whatever, whenever you're free. But I just want to go on. I just have a list of things. I don't, I'm trying to understand you. I just wrote down a little bit. I'm just going in, firing off. So what do you think about? Do you think like the left and the right, as of now, today in the United States, do you think that they're splitting and actually going farther apart than what they are? And there would, you know what I mean? Like the conservatives, usually right, there's like a far right and a far left. Over time, we've seen like a split in between just the left and the right. And a lot of people, I assume, depending how you said I joined in late, but I heard you say that you got into politics early, and I did as well. And looking at politics now from today's standards, I feel like the left and the right are very similar in a lot of ways. Do you agree with that?
So this is what I would say. What do you mean by the right and the left, right? And I'm not actually asking you. It's a bit rhetorical.
Well, I'm just saying the stereotypical right. The red and the blue. This is like how a lot of people.
Like I said, it's rhetorical in a sense. Sorry, not rhetorical. I don't know why I can't think of the word now, but I'll pass by it. When you say the right and the left, I think it's important to make a distinction, right, between right and left. Right and left politicians, and then people in the country that tend to be right or left leaning. And right and left politicians, we'll set that aside for just a moment. Between the right and the left leaning people in this country, I think what is occurring is that the left is adopting Marxist philosophy, even if they are not adopting Marxism per se. I think they are, and there's a culture war within the left, right? Between individuals that are 90s Democrats, Blue Dog Democrats, Union Democrats, right? And then people who have been, believe in ideologies or sociological lenses or philosophy that has come from critical analysis, critical race theory, mapping the margins, Kimberly Crenshaw's kind of like intersectionality, and things like that. And the right and the left may, generally put this under the umbrella of like wokeness or CRT.
Let me say it this way. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm saying it's going both ways though. You're saying critical race theory.
I'm only partway through my explanation.
Well, hold on. Let me broaden it. I apologize. But it's similar to both sides, though. They're both broadening out. So this is what I mean.
Right. Again, I'm only talking about the left currently, but I was going to talk about the right.
But it's the same thing. That's my whole point. Like they're both basically doing the same thing. They're broadening.
Is this a question or a statement?
Well, this is just what I'm seeing, and with policies and all this stuff. This is why I was asking it. Like, what do you think about it splitting up and basically it becoming melding, or it's basically melding? It splits up and it melds together to be a certain thing. It's like purple now. It seems to me anyway.
So I guess I'll continue with my explanation, right? So I think the left, right, is being dragged to the left by Marxist philosophy. On the right, I think you're seeing two things occur. Now, the right have lost every single solitary battle that has pretty much ever occurred within American history, right? The right, as a conservative, like as a classical conservative, right, which is to preserve the institutions and the status quo, as opposed to like William F. Buckley's neoconservative, which was, anti-communist and war hawk, right? I think the right, for the most part, and from the classical sense, have lost every single battle and have shifted to the left, both philosophically and politically, throughout all of American history. That being said, the culture war has spilled out in such a degree that is creating a reaction from the right. And so what I think you have is a split in the right as well, a little bit of a battle that is occurring in the right. And I think you saw this with Donald Trump, right? Because you have a group of right-wing people that are now reacting to the culture wars, some of whom are just saying, I hate it. Some of whom are becoming like, the Nick Fuentes and people like that, right? You have this pipeline to the alt-right, if you will, and things like that.
Dude, alt-right's cringy. Don't even say that. Alt-right's done. Let's be honest. Like, anybody who goes ahead and affiliates with the alt-right, they seem like psyops. Let's be honest.
Yeah, well, Glow is going to glow. Glow is glow sometimes. But what I'm saying is I think you're having a cultural reaction to the culture war on the left, especially as the left kind of now owns most of the institutions in this country. They don't own state governments, obviously. They don't own all of the media, but they are predominant in most media, especially, television, Hollywood, social media companies are very left-wing. The bureaucracy tends to be very left-wing. And that's part and parcel of education as well, right? The left tends to be better educated and college educated.
Well, universities.
The university system, right. And so when you're asking about this shift that's occurring, I think what you are seeing is a culture war on the left, as well as a right-wing reaction. And I think you're also seeing a crumbling of neoconservatism. You speak to most conservatives today, and most of them tend to actually be anti-war, and most of them tend to be at least very soft on the drug war, unless you're talking to like Christian conservatives, right? Most of the Republican Party's voter demographic is not neocon, right? They're populist conservatives.
Yes, very true.
Yes. And so I don't know about like what this means for our country. I don't want to be too predictive of the future, right? Like I don't have a crystal ball. But obviously there's a lot of conflict occurring here, and it will be interesting to see how that conflict resolves itself.
Do you think that has anything to do with foreign like money pulling in and affecting?
I think it has very little to do with that. I think it has mostly to do.
Really?
I think it is mostly a cause of 1960s critical theory, critical analysis, Marxisian philosophy.
You're saying with left and right? You're saying it has nothing. It doesn't.
I think the AFL-IO and shit like that has very little relevance to what is occurring in the split.
How so?
Well, you made the claim, so you would have to stake the claim for me to say that I don't think it's pertinent.
Well, I'm just saying. What I see now is we have a lot of foreign money coming in and transitioning the ways that the right and the left politicians think, and they're steering ways to where it doesn't really benefit America. Like, I'm more so America first, and people can say otherwise, and that's fine.
I have a question for you then, real quick. What's the difference between foreign money coming in and large corporate powers using their money for influence? Because to me, I would say there's very little different.
Well, it depends what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is like I could care less if our politicians are being bought off by big oil or if they're being bought off by China. To me, they're both institutions that have their own political reasons and things like that. Like,
sure.
I don't know. I wouldn't say that it's foreign money coming in, right? I would say it's the fact that our system is corruptible by design, and it doesn't really matter who's corrupting it.
Sure, and that's fine. But the way that you go ahead and you stated that doesn't mean that we can't change that. And the way that
I never said that.
You know what I mean? Like, we can change that. We don't. Like, the whole point is you don't want to be corrupted. You don't want to go ahead and bow the knee to a different country or anything like that. We are America is what I mean. We are basically the military for a lot of people around here, and we do. We can go ahead and go into the military-industrial complex, etc. But I feel like
prison military-industrial complex. Never forget
that as well. But I feel like we shouldn't have to basically throw money out to these nations and all of this, getting bad deals, basically getting shorted a lot for what we do and what we actually produce for other people. I feel like
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
Well,
I mean, I'm an isolationist, but that's why I think that our system is corruptible, and the easiest way to fix that corruption is to reduce their power.
Bro. Well, it's always going to be.
Unless they don't have power over me, then it doesn't matter if they're corrupted.
How would they not have power over you?
If we dismantle them.
Who? What do you mean, like by war or something, or just
No,
by
I mean,
like shutting down banks or something? What do you mean?
I mean, with dual power theory, agorism, and the slow march towards libertarianism until the eventual day that we can dissolve the state and be done with this silly system of governments.
No, that's where I disagree. But
yeah,
I mean,
well, it's a Q&A from an anarchist, so you should expect as much.
Okay, yeah. I don't believe in anarchism. I like the idea. I like the possibility of it, but in the long run, I don't think it would ever actually be worthwhile. I feel like it would be really bad for the majority of people. You know, it's funny because usually my whole theory is if you do have anarchism, usually it leads back to capitalism. Capitalism is like one of the best things that we have, and it works. It's just these corrupt people that we have to go ahead, and it seems like it's just gotten out of hand at this point.
Anarchism does usually lead to capitalism and or being taken over by a foreign nation, and I do think capitalism is extremely based. Otherwise, I wouldn't be an anarcho-capitalist.
That's like you're like LARPing though. That doesn't even make sense to me. Like you're either this or that. Like you can't be both. It's like you're trans or something. You know what I mean?
No, I know what you mean, but I respectfully disagree, or I wouldn't be an anarcho-capitalist.
Well, I don't know. I still don't understand what that means. It seems like you just made that word up.
Well, I promise you I didn't.
I don't
Rothbard
get it, though,
did.
Yeah, but eventually you will lead to I mean, listen, I would 100% agree with you if we had a place where anarchism actually.
I'm more anarchist than I am
in
capitalist.
due time.
Well, the Republic of Kospaya was an anarcho-individualist society stuck between Florence and the Papal States that lasted from 1440 to 1826, nearly 400 years. Older than America is today, is how successful and long-lasting an anarchist community existed in Italy. And the Chiron, Mexico, is an indigenismo, anarcho-environmentalist, anarcho-mutualist system that is currently existing. In 2011, they were established, and they were making $1,000 US dollars a year salary, and today they're making 3,300 with a population of 18,000, and they've planted over 3,000 hectares of forest, and they're doing great. So those are some examples.
Thing is,
Kennedy, wait 1 second. We do have a lot of other people with questions.
No shit.
So why don't you take some time to think up some questions or attacks from this position?
Sorry.
Okay.
I apologize. Thank you for talking to me.
Well, thank you, Kennedy.
I didn't mean to end it on a dunk. I apologize there, buddy, but I'll answer questions later, of course.
Yeah, Kennedy, if you have any more questions, just think them up and put them in the AMA questions category. And that goes to everybody. If you guys want to come on and talk to Scott in the voice channel, just add VC to the end of your question and I'll bring you in. And for those of you who weren't aware already, this is being streamed on his Twitch channel, which I encourage all of you to follow and subscribe to. That link is at the top of the category, but if you can't see it all, it's twitch.tv/FabianLiberty. That's also linked in the discussion channel in the pins. Okay, moving on to the next question. Let's go with a question from...
That wasn't a question, yeah.
Perseus. What's the Ancap solution to preventing egregious crimes committed by corporate or government bodies?
Well, government bodies is a simple one, right? Because we're against government. So I guess it means in what locus, what snapshot of time are we talking about? Because if we're in, quote unquote, Ancapistan, as the memes like to call it, then there wouldn't be a government. But if we're in today's time, the answer is, libertarian ideas, fraud, using the institution of the state to punish those things. If we're in anarcho-capitalism, you're saying, what about corporate crimes? It gets really deep into the theory. But I will say that there's not a lot of consensus, right? I'll explain some of the ideas here in just a second. But the fact of the matter is that When you talk about these things to, let's say, an ANCOM or an anarcho-socialist or an anarcho-mutualist, they say, oh, well, we'll vote on it, right? If we have a conflict of some type, we'll vote, right? Well, we don't necessarily have that system because we don't have a state. So what we offer in lieu of this is quite a few things. One of them is known as rights enforcement agencies. So just like you have car insurance, you would have insurance for your rights. And those insurance companies would look at what your individual rights are, and there would be a system of common law that would be accepted within your covenant community, within your area, and they would protect those rights via arbitration. Now you're like, well, how do you force that? How do you enforce that? So it gets a little bit more complicated when you understand that the society is designed to dissolve conflict. Now, how do you define conflict? And the way that we define conflict is when one's private property, right, engages when one piece of property wants to be used via different means by different people, right? So I have a glass of water and it is my glass. I pick up my glass, but someone else wants to pick up my glass and drink it, right? How do we resolve this conflict? Well, we resolve this conflict by saying that this is my property. I do with the glass as I choose to do with the glass. If you want to communalize things, right, then there needs to be a private property owner who then has contracts, and individuals can engage with those contracts as they see fit. So I build a park. I have rules for my park. If you follow my rules, everything is fine. If you don't follow my rules, then we can move on from there. We can follow the non-aggression principle, which is the not wanting to initiate force, right? And then we move forward in that situation. I may have private police or community police or some means of enforcing the rules on my property, and you would have a rights enforcement agency that protects your rights in certain situations. Now, we get to the corporate issue, right? A large corporation with a large amount of capital, right? And in a system where everything is a free market, one may assume, well, if this person has all of the money, they can buy up all of the things and they can have all of the power. Well, there's a few situations there. Number one, we disagree with a lot of people's economic assumptions that are required to reach this conclusion of a large corporation buying up all these things. We believe that a state actually supports large amounts of capital and monopolistic tendencies. Number one, we don't believe in corporations. We don't believe in limited liability. We don't believe that a super wealthy person can own a corporation and then can fire all of his people and it doesn't matter, or that he can bankrupt his company and walk away with billions of dollars, or she. What we believe in is companies, right? Companies hold financial responsibility for their assets, for their employees, for their contracts, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is, very briefly, we believe that the tax system, the system of laws and regulations, the judicial system, the system of subsidies, and the system of massive amounts of taxation, the system of intellectual property rights, etc., actually help monopolistic tendencies grow. We can look at this from history. AT&T being one of the largest corporations that had to be busted up by the United States Supreme Court. And then you realize in 1934, the government nationalized that corporation, that intellectual property protected that corporation, and a lot of other things that from the state is the reason that monopoly existed to begin with. Standard Oil was an efficiency monopoly that was already breaking apart before we broke it apart anyways. So you realize that even in our fucked up system of capitalism, we've never really had a monopoly that has been that dangerous, except for interferences of the state. The same could be said for Walmart, which is heavily subsidized by the welfare system, as well as the fact that a majority of all Walmarts are actually given tax incentives to build. Local places actually get money and then give money to Walmart so that they build a Walmart and destroy their local economy. All of these systems are completely corrupt, and it is the state that we believe that increases this corporate malfeasance, if you will. Combining strong unions, social capital, rights enforcement agencies, insurance, and private contracts where people choose to work from these corporations or they choose not, or companies, and choose not to work with these companies, what you begin to see is that we do not believe that the incentive structure or the economic policy is there for that large amounts of companies to exploit their workers or exploit people actually exists. And in the event that they do these things, we believe that not only will rights enforcement agencies, as well as unions, as well as voluntary workers choosing to work in other places, facilities, and the market being formed of hopefully full of informed consumers, will allow these businesses to hopefully fail and crumble. And under the most extreme circumstances, rights enforcement agencies would be forced to use their own police in order to enforce the rights of those individuals that have been violated, if, let's say, they were beating up their employees or something.
Wow, great answer. Okay, well, next question is going to be from Boston. Boston says he's not that well educated in this area, but he wants to know if there's any opportunity for there to be a connection between paleoconservatives and Ancaps.
So paleoconservatism and anarcho-capitalism is actually a really interesting way that you say that, because there was something known as paleo-libertarianism, which was made by, Murray Rothbard, and I'm Googling real quick because I cannot think of the person's name. Libertarianism. I apologize for just a moment, because it's really important that I get this name, because it's really big person, and for whatever reason I can't.
Is it Lou Rockwell?
No. Oh my God. It was a really big conservative at the time. Maybe someone can help me out in my chat. It is, Rockwell is one of them, but anyways, paleo-libertarianism is a thing. The Canadian party, I can't remember the Canadian Libertarian Party, they tend to be fairly paleo-libertarian. And Hoppe, Hans Hermann Hoppe, right, which is a pretty big thinker within Ancap space, believes that you can't actually be a conservative without being libertarian, or be a libertarian without being conservative. I tend to disagree a little bit, but I do think that there is plenty of space between coalition. I think most ANCAPs today understand that anarcho-capitalism isn't going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, right? Good men plant seeds for trees of which the shade they will never sit in, kind of situation, right? Like, we know that this isn't happening tomorrow, and we're doing the best that we can. And so we tend to work with constitutional conservatives and regular libertarians as a means of moving forward. So I think anarcho-capitalism is the extreme goal of the more radical libertarians, but paleo-libertarianism and paleoconservatism, I think, are really honestly two names for the same thing. The only difference is that paleocons are tricked into voting for people that are conservatives in name only. And I think if they would just look more at their libertarian ideals, they would find that there's a lot more similar between us than different.
Cool. Okay. Next question is going to be from, I think this is Wine. He's got it in like some nerdy lead speak shit. But the question is in the announcement of your AMA, there's a video linked where you promote the idea that private police forces would innovate, presumably as a result of the profit motive. Do you ever consider that on innovation that might, let me read this, he's written this also. Do you ever consider that an innovation that might make them very profitable is control of an area as warlords? And to be clear, the video that I linked is the most recent one. It's how can an anarchist nation defend itself?
And so what was that last bit about the warlords, and how was he linking that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so he's saying that in your video you promoted the idea that private police forces would innovate, presumably as a result of the profit motive, or as a result of the profit motive. So he's saying that if you consider that one innovation that these private police forces might consider or get into is control of an area as warlords, because of this would be very profitable.
Yeah, I think that's silly because I don't think it's profitable at all, right? First of all, if you're living in an anarchist community, then presumably a critical mass of individuals within that anarchist community believe in things like individual sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you need and in that same video, I argue that in order to maintain self-defense, you need strong cultural cohesion as well as a well-armed population. Right. So in order for private policing to be successful, you need a well-armed population and strong cultural cohesion. If you have those two things, I find it very unlikely that a police force would attempt to become a warlord that has to now feed themselves, that has to now deal with possible sanctions, that has to deal with the tax that comes with being a warlord and their ability to trade with others, right? I don't think the financial incentive is there. And also one of the things that I suggest in that video as well, it seems that maybe they just read the bullet points and didn't watch the video, which is fine. I get it. I argue for ESOP models of policing. I think having A shares and B shares co-ops in policing is probably the most effective form of private policing, because what this does is as individuals enter the police force, they have their A shares, and then you get B shares, let's say with seniority or with promotions. And what this means is that every single police officer would be financially responsible for the conduct and behavior of all of the other police. And so I think it would be far better than, let's say, what we have in America, where police are not responsible at all for what their other police officers are doing, where the police unions can't be sued since 1967 Pearson v. Ray, which was designed to allow police officers to beat the shit out of civil rights protesters and not get sued. And instead, you have police officers hanging out in neighborhoods at 2 o'clock in the morning looking for black men between the ages of 16 and 24, hoping that they can pull them over for some minor traffic violation in the hopes that they have drugs on them. I think you already live under a system of violence, and that I think an ESOP model where police officers are financially responsible for the conduct and behavior of others, and where they are in competition with other police agencies, will absolutely be a much better incentive structure than one where we can't sue them and we can't do anything, and they don't even have, as according to the Supreme Court, they don't even have a duty or responsibility to take care or protect us.
Right. Okay. Well, next, actually, just FYI. So Wayne confirmed in chat that he didn't watch the entire video. So you're right. Okay. Next question is from Tylenol. That question is, how would you avoid abuses of workers by companies, like withholding wages, unsafe working conditions, etc., in an Ancap world?
I mean, I could go into it, but I feel like I kind of already gave the structure and the financial incentive structure and everything when I talked about corporate exploitation. My answer would likely be the same, right? Rights enforcement agencies and things like that. If people withhold wages, right? This is something that would be brought up in arbitration. If you have an employment contract, you have a third party arbitrator, right? So I go to work for you. I sign a contract saying, this is how much I'm going to be paid. These are the rules, right? Like this is when I'm supposed to show up, et cetera, right? And if you are skirting certain safety things, or then, that leads to harm, or you're refusing to pay me in some way, well, that's why I have a rights enforcement agency, and I contact them. I file a claim just like you would for car insurance. Say, hey, my employer is doing this. Here's their insurance company's information. They call their insurance company's information, and then they handle the situation. And if they can't handle the situation, it eventually goes into arbitration, which would have been decided on in the contract. I would never work anywhere in an anarcho-capitalist society where I don't already have a contract for that very system. And the thing is too, I think, to understand about this system, because it sounds kind of crazy high in the sky, right? But we already do this with cars, right? 97% of all car accidents don't see a day in court. Well, why is that? Well, that's because insurance companies kind of already have an agreement to work together in these scenarios, right? So you have different levels in insurance companies. For example, you have property damage, you have call center, and then it gets elevated to bodily harm. And if Geico and Nationwide can't figure it out, and like they're disagreeing on the facts of the case, or they just can't figure it out, then it gets moved up to what's known as litigation. And then you have insurance, oh my God, I can't think of the term right now, but individuals that work within litigation. And they work in litigation, right? And then they will eventually end up working with lawyers, right? And they still try and settle out of court. And then if there's nothing that they can do, they go to court. The difference is under anarcho-capitalism, you already had a contract and you agreed to go to a certain arbitrating firm. And so those two companies would go to that arbitrating firm. And then it would be handled and settled in arbitration.
Right. Okay. Pretty straightforward. Next question is from Corona Beard. You can unmute yourself whenever you're ready. Mr. Beard? Mr. Corona?
Corona Beard is a great name for the record.
Okay, I see you unmuted, but you're not talking. Any second now he's going to speak. I'm convinced. Okay, maybe he's dead. Okay, well, while he's getting himself together.
Thank you, Julian.
Actually, I think I know what it is. I think it's because I've turned off voice activity.
Good job.
Yeah, that's probably
really good job.
Shh. Okay, try now. You should be able to speak. If you can't speak, it's your fuck up and not mine, okay? Nah, he can't speak.
Double fuck up.
Okay, it's entirely his fault. Okay. Moving on. So we'll
Dead air, doobie.
Okay, RV. We'll get to the next question. Next question is going to be from, let's go with Liquid Zulu. What is your take on the recent homeless person dispute?
Motherfucker, with Liquid Zulu coming into AMA me, it's another Ancap for the record.
Oh, God. Okay, well, the question is, what is your take on the recent homeless person dispute on libertarian Twitter? Do you think it is just for parents to call the cops to evict a homeless man from the local public park? Now, I don't know. I'm not in libertarian Twitter. I don't use Twitter.
Neither am I. I don't give a fuck about Twitter because I don't give a fuck about drama. But I will answer the second part of that question.
Okay.
Which is, do you think it is okay for people to call the police to evict a homeless man from a park? I think you have to live in the reality of the fact that we live in a state, right? Your taxes are paying for a park and there's a homeless man. I don't know what he's doing. I don't know if he's causing problems, but if he is causing harm in some capacity, then yeah, call the police because he's causing harm. If he's, I don't know the story, right? So if he's not causing harm and he's just there, then my issue is with the state stealing my money to build a park that I didn't want or that I don't like. My issue is not with the homeless guy that's living in a tent in the park. So I guess it depends upon the consequence of what the homeless man in the park is doing, would be my answer. Again, I don't really know the story. I've heard inklings and rumblings of it, but I just didn't care to give a fuck, to be honest.
So just to be sure, just to be clear, you're saying because, we live in the society is structured the way it is now. And people are paying taxes for this park, and they're doing so with the understanding this park has rules. It might be reasonable for them to want this guy kicked out.
I'm saying that in the absence of when you're dealing with public property, in my opinion, is a moral evil in and of itself. Obviously there are worse evils like, murder and, things like that. Right. But you stole money and resources from me, from companies, etc., in order to build, this facility that maybe a majority of people wanted, but certainly no private investor, created in some capacity. Now, if it's a private park, right, and then it was donated to the state, that's a little bit different, right? But my thing is that if this person is causing harm in this area, right, then I think you can call the police on someone that is causing harm, right? But if they're not causing any harm and you just don't like it because it makes your park gross, right, or creepy, like, don't go to that park. I don't understand. You know what I mean? Like, I guess I would need
Right.
to understand the situation better before I could give a better, more detailed answer.
Okay, that makes sense. Next question is going to be from Ruby Quartz. What are your thoughts on the Omicron? I think they're spelling this incorrectly. The new COVID variant infecting the entire world as a whole. Now, what I think they're getting at is, like, in an Ancap society, an Ancap world, how would you deal with something like this?
Individual sovereignty and private property owners would not. There's a quote from Bastiat. I read it on Hippy Dippy last night. I think it's really, I think it answers a question that we're having here in a really fun way. So I'll read this from Bastiat, who's inspired Austrian economics, right? French economist. Socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to it being done at all. We disapprove of state education. Then the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to a state religion. Then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to a state-enforced equality, then they say that we are against equality, and so on and so on. It is as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain. So the answer here is that private property owners don't want their clientele and people don't want to die from coronavirus. We can hear you.
Corona, we can hear you now. But let him finish the
right. People don't want to.
I didn't realize I was still unmuted.
It's okay.
People don't want to die from coronavirus, and businesses don't want their employees or their consumers or customers to die, right? So under anarcho-capitalism, I would assume that certain private property owners would look at this differently. You may have one Starbucks, for example, right? It's probably going to have mask mandates, plexiglass, social distancing, things of that nature. They may even do temperature checks, et cetera, et cetera. And another business may do none of those things, right? And when someone is infected, at a place, there may be some litigation. We'll see how that works. That may be legitimate or illegitimate. But fact of the matter is that if society is informed about a virus, right, that is potentially deadly and fatal to large numbers of people, then, businesses are going to react to how it is that the public is, and private property owners are going to be able to do what it is that they want to do. People may want to quarantine themselves. They may work at companies that, do work from home, and other companies may not do, may do something else. Now, I think it's interesting when talking about this variant because the science really doesn't back up a lot of the fear mongering that people tend to have. You look at Sweden, you look at Africa, you look at Japan, you look at places that had initial hard lockdowns or no lockdowns at all, and then ease those restrictions. Japan never had a lockdown. They simply had a government advisory, right? And Japan is doing way better in terms of the ratio of individuals that died. Now, Japan is a much healthier nation, right? And Japan is a little bit more conscientious about viruses and face masks and things of that nature than our culture is. But at the same time, Kyoto has such a problem with the elderly that they're having to teach random people how to deal with dementia because they have so many old people living there that people often wander off into the forests, right? So some data goes, towards the idea that they have less people dying because of certain health statistics and demographics. Other data goes the other way. So I think maybe some of this is a bit of the fear mongering and the idea that people believe that this virus is worse than it actually is, or that the vaccine is more effective than it actually is. And to support my claim, I'll simply say this. In the United States, Gallup did a poll and they found that 98% of all people who identify as Democrats and 84% of all people in America who identify as Republicans overestimated the hospitalization rate of COVID. So that is only 2% of Democrats and 16% of Republicans are not overestimating the dangers of COVID.
Okay. That's a very I think a very good answer to that question. Well, the next question coming up, hopefully, if he's got his mic working this time, is from Corona Beard. Corona Beard, if you fuck up this time, I'm banning you from the internet.
All right, I think we're good. Hey, Scott, really enjoying AMA here. Just wanted to ask your personal opinions on borders and border control, economic protectionism in general.
Yeah, so I kind of tend to agree with Hoppe on this, right? You know, you hear a lot of libertarians and a lot of anarchist Ancaps being for open borders. The problem is that anarcho-capitalism doesn't believe in open borders. What anarcho-capitalism believes in is private borders, right? And because we have a state, we have to kind of engage with this evil in such a way that there's no right answer here. Because if you have, for example, open borders, right, then that is tyrannical from the state's perspective, because you are forcing communities that have welfare states and taxes and things, right, to pay for people coming in that they may not want. At the same time, if you have closed borders, you're being tyrannical because there are places that do want these immigrants, right? Maybe for cheap labor in a factory, right? If we were, let's say, in southern Texas, there's no reason you couldn't have a factory that was mostly, South American immigrants that are low skill, low wage, and those would be jobs for Americans in terms of working in human resources, being the engineer, being the architect, being, the plant manager, being the guy that fixes the machines when they break, right? So even something that might be predominantly low skill, low wage, would still have high skill, high wage labor there as well. Because we can't have freedom of association in this country, right? We have the Civil Rights Act, which makes it illegal to discriminate against people based off of certain immutable characteristics. And so people are not free to discriminate in certain capacities, and they're also not free to discriminate in terms of immigration status because they don't control the borders, and they don't control who is legally allowed to work in this country and not. So what we have to do is we have to hope to engage with the southern border as best as possible as a private owner would, right? And so I think the best way to do that, which is the least harm, so long as we still have a welfare state, is to limit access across the border to individuals that go through legal systems of lottery. I would also implement that they're not allowed in unless they bring certain skills that prove that they're economically viable. It
seems like ending the welfare state would be a prerequisite to opening a border.
Yeah, absolutely. As Milton Friedman said, right? You can either have open borders or a welfare state, but you can't have both. We would engage with that. Now, when it comes to legitimate refugee concerns, I am of two minds of this. Principally, I would say that what we should do is we should allow NGOs and nonprofit organizations, right, to be able to accept refugees in so long as they pay for them. But practically, that's not really going to happen. And so I think in extreme circumstances, I'm willing to sacrifice my principles here a little bit. Other more hardcore anarcho-capitalists wouldn't. But I would say, if, you know what I mean? Like if there's a war, like I don't want another situation where the Jews trying to escape Nazi Germany come to our fucking country and we turn them away. Right.
Surely you can see the problem with allowing, you're arguing for regulation, allowing an NGO to import, refugees. This is obviously a massive potential for abuse. I was starting a nonprofit, quote unquote nonprofit, import thousands or millions of workers.
Right. And the real issue here is like I was saying before, there's no right answer here from our perspective. And the reason is because we still have a welfare state.
Yeah, no, I really, really appreciate it. It's a nuanced take. It's a difficult issue for ANCAPs, especially given all of the existing structures.
Right. So it's like, how do we deal with that? We want to do the best that we can to imitate a private property owner and realize that the real issue here is not open borders. The real issue is that individuals are allowed to come across that border and become economic migrants, and a majority of immigrant households from South America across our southern border are using some form of welfare. This means that we are, as individuals, being taxed for individuals coming into our country, when instead what should be occurring is, without a welfare state, we could have open borders, because they would only come here if they had the means to work here. And if they don't have the means to work here, they're not going to stay here because the opportunity isn't here. And if they have the means to work here, that means that they were more competitive than other labor, and that is an overall boon to the economy.
Fantastic answer. I really appreciate it. Just one more question before I let Doobie go on to the other questions. Have you read Neil Stephenson, and do you like The Diamond Age or Snow Crash? And do you perceive this kind of transition as possibly occurring in the future?
I can't say that I have. I apologize. Like I said at the beginning, I'm a talking head that can communicate ideas, but I'm not the brightest Ancap that there are out there. Like, there are definitely smarter, more well-read individuals out there. Most of my stuff actually is within the field of sociology and psychology.
I'll send you some links. Thanks again.
Yeah, of course. I'd love to read some stuff.
Awesome. Okay. Well, the next question is from Snufkin. The question is, how are corporations expected to take I'm going to repeat this. How are corporations expected to take proper care of the environment without regulations and laws?
So there's a misconception within the question itself, right? Which is, there are no regulations or laws. Technically, there are no laws because there's no government. But anarchism does not mean no rules. It just means no rulers, right? You have private property owners. Now, there are different theorists from minarchists and anarcho-capitalists alike in how we deal with things like, let's say, airspace and water rights and things like that, right? But presumably, if you are polluting the water supply, right, there are owners of that water. Now, that water is either privately owned or it's what's known as common property. In either scenario, you are financially responsible for the harm that you cause. Because even I as an individual, if I own no property, I own myself. I own my body, right? That is the philosophical beginning of the right to private property, is the fact that I own myself. And so if you cause harm to me via your pollution, then you're financially responsible for it. Furthermore, you're not a corporation, you're a company. So you don't get to fucking bankrupt yourself and then walk away with your billions of dollars and start a new company. You owe me the money that shall be determined for the damages you caused me. So the answer to that is rights enforcement agencies and arbitration, and possible forcible arbitration if necessary. If it is what's known as a negative externality, right? Like a contract between party A and party B, and the pollution affects party C. You violated my rights, and so we're going to figure out a way to deal with this. Now, in our current system, the government would take care of it. But I would say one need only do a very small amount of research in how horrible and ineffective the EPA is to kind of dismiss away the idea that the EPA is going to do a better job than, let's say, free market agencies, insurance companies, and private arbitration.
Awesome. Okay. Well, next question is from Tylenol. Tylenol, whenever you're ready.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I can hear you a little bit quiet, but
Here, how about if I can get...
there you go. That's
that
great.
better?
That's great.
Perfect, thanks. First of all, thanks for coming in here. I'm really enjoying this AMA. This is a pretty interesting opportunity. I just have a couple of questions that I've chucked in the chat, and I think I'll just ask them in VC to make it a little easier for everybody here. But I'm just going to start off. What is your ideal role of a company in Ancap? What is the company meant to do? What is the extent of the company?
Well, it's no different, I would say, than companies today. They have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. They would attempt to be profitable. So I think the really interesting thing here, right, is if you want to be wealthy in a capitalist system, what you need to do is you need to have the desire for wealth, right? So you can't have a desire. You can have a desire for wealth, but you can't have a desire for wealth if, let's say, wealth affords you nothing in your society, right? So this is where, capitalism is different in the economic calculation problem and stuff like that, right? Is that The problems are solved via the desire to be wealthy. And so once you have a desire to be wealthy in a capitalist system, how do you get wealth? Well, under our crony capitalism that we have with the nation states, one of the ways you can do that is regulatory capture, stealing money from people and going to the state and trying to find ways to get regulations written in your favor, using intellectual property rights to buy up things so that your competition can't compete, et cetera, et cetera. But under a free market capitalist system, the best way to get wealthy is to solve problems. Either going to a company and solving problems for them, creating products, goods, and services that consumers want and desire, et cetera, whatever those problems are. And so the ideal company is one that is profitable, and one that is profitable, given proper incentives, is one that solves problems. And I think that's a good thing.
I like that idea of problem solving. I mean, I agree with you about the whole crony capitalism thing. I frankly fucking hate it. Stupid and doesn't work and doesn't solve problems like you say it does. Well, it should at least. But kind of segue into my next question, kind of while speaking of property rights and whatnot. It's about Locke. So would you agree with John Locke and that self-agency? So the idea that we own ourselves and nothing can really take that away is the most important moral we can uphold. And what does this look like under a company-based system? Like, how would a company affect your right of self-agency?
So I would agree with Locke. The only thing I would disagree with Locke on his second treatise of government is his economics, right? Because this is still a time period where people are believing in labor theory of value, right? This is before the marginal revolution. But in terms of self-ownership and property, he's dead on. In terms of how he defines homesteading, I think he would be incorrect, right? But in terms of how does a company work in that regard, well, you're engaged in a voluntary contract with your company, right? So you're choosing to work there. You're choosing to do the things that they want you to do, and it's a voluntary exchange, right? So I guess I would need a more pointed question into understanding, because it seems that your question seems to be presuppose a certain level of exploitation of the sovereignty of the individual. And maybe if you were more pointed in what that means, I could go into further detail.
Yeah, I guess what I'm really trying to pick at here is the whole presupposed idea that in order for you to make a living in, I say, like the modern world, the contemporary world, you gotta work with a company, they pay you in exchange, you give them time, that's your opportunity cost that you evaluate and whatnot. And some would argue that that's in a way kind of giving up some of your liberty in order to actually live in, like, the United States, for example. Like, you obviously can't really live a sustainable lifestyle if you're homeless on the streets, you don't make any money, and you gotta pander for money and whatnot. So given that, how would you say that in an Ancap world, where obviously we have the abolition of government, you don't really have you have more of like a third-party system.
Yeah.
You know, like, how would it affect your self-agency? How would it more or less your liberty and whatnot?
So I think what's actually presupposed in your question is a philosophy of positive and negative rights, right? And so this might actually be where we're disagreeing once we really get down into the details, right? Is that we're actually disagreeing on what a right is and what liberty is. Anarcho-capitalist philosophy does not engage with positive and negative rights. Rights are capabilities, right? Just like we don't believe healthcare is a right, for example, because you don't have a right to someone else's labor. So while I understand what you're saying, I think we would disagree, and possibly I'm just being pedantic with it, but I think really what's going on is that we don't believe that you have a right to not be affected by the world, right? We don't believe that you're somehow losing your agency by choosing a voluntary contract to gain wages and things like that. A right is a capability. You have the capability and the freedom to go out into the woods and homestead your own home and grow your own food and do whatever the fuck you want. You have a right to start your own business if that's what you choose to do. Now, there is this interesting thing within sociology that is, I think, really, really interesting, because it gets into the idea of equality. It's called Jason's Triangle. And Jason's Triangle is, you can't see my camera unless you're watching my stream, but basically you have a triangle and you can put your society, if you will, or the individual, you can put a dot anywhere in the triangle. And the idea is that you cannot have a purity of all 3 points of the triangle, right? You have to have a balance between these 3 points. And the 3 points of the triangle are meritocracy, parental rights, and equality of opportunity. Now, if you have a purely meritocratic society where the best people are always chosen for the job based off of their skills and what they bring to the table, and you have pure parental rights, which is my parents can send me to private school, or, I have the right to educate my children in the philosophy that I believe in. I have the right to be a custodian of a guardian of my child and impart upon them my wisdom, right? Then you cannot have equality of opportunity, because some children don't get to go to private school. Some children don't have both of their parents. Some children have shitty parents or low IQ parents, right? You can't have equality of opportunity if you have these other things. And you can go down each of these things, right? You can have a purely meritocratic society and pure equality of opportunity, but what you have to get rid of is parental rights. The state has to raise your children. And this would essentially look like a dystopian, Huxley's Brave New World, right? Where the state is genetically creating people and giving them the jobs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, the alpha, the gammas, the betas.
Right.
Shit.
Or
Right.
you can have communism, which says we shall have no meritocracy. And instead you can have parental rights and you can raise your children as you see fit. And everyone has the same opportunities, but you're simply assigned the job that you want. And now you are all equal to starve to death. I mean, you're all equal. Just quipping a little bit, but right. So I think that the issue here is that the way we define rights is your freedom to do things uninhibited by coercion. And you would say, well, if I don't have healthcare, if I don't have these certain things to make my life better, then am I not in some way coerced by the system? Or am I not in a situation where I'm forced to take a job even though it doesn't benefit me because I have to put food on the table? And I would simply disagree with that notion of liberty in and of itself. But I would also say pragmatically, when the state is so ineffective and corrupt, I don't see how, even if you have that philosophical system, how our system would be worse. I think our system would be, from a consequentialist perspective, better in the sense that we do not have this corrupted state. And I think you would see less of what you may define as exploitation or, some form of negative rights. But our idea of liberty is different definitionally.
Damn, you're too good at this. Well, I like that. That was a really nice response. Thanks for that. Just one more question. I'm going to pass it on to some more people. It kind of goes back to what you answered for one of my previous questions, and that was, how would you incentivize an increase in civic participation and civic pride? Because around the world today, I mean, you have Australia, for example. They incentivize civic participation in voting by fining you if you don't vote. In the United States, there's a lot of campaigns to get younger people to vote on college campuses, and so on and so forth. How would you, in an Ancap world, let's just simplify it down a little bit, how would you increase civic participation?
Yeah, I think necessity is the mother of invention, and I think the state disincentivizes that participation. This goes back to the idea of social capital I was talking about, right? When you have a nanny state that kind of does so many things for you, and so many aspects of life that used to be handled by churches, right? Not to say that I'm like this giant religious proponent or anything, but things used to be done by churches and by the community. And then women entered the workforce, right? Which is, in many ways a good thing. But we lost a lot, right? We lost a lot of social capital and social institutions. And over time, we have replaced them with governmental institutions. When those governmental institutions are gone, you're going to have to be involved. You're going to have to be involved in your community. You're going to have to be involved with your family, for example. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? These are supposedly seen as good things, and they are in many ways, but I would say that they are mostly negative, not just because of the economic problems, but because what we have done is we have essentially kicked our grandparents out of our houses and stopped them from helping us educate and rear our children as a large family unit, and have instead decided that we wanted the nuclear family and we were willing to pay taxes so that we don't have to deal with our parents anymore. And I think that is in many ways a moral evil. We have allowed the system to steal from people so that we can separate family, and I think when you take that logic into so many other aspects, what you realize is that in order for anarcho-capitalism or any form of anarchism to work, you're going to have to be engaged with your community, or at the very least, a critical mass of people are going to have to be engaged deeply with the community in order for it to work at all. And so I don't think you need to incentivize it when it simply doesn't work unless it occurs.
Awesome. Thank you for the answers.
Great. Thank you, Talanoff. The next question we've got is from Halo Posting Schizoid. You are unmuted. Go whenever you're ready.
Great name.
Hey, hello. Anyways, I just wanted to, you probably gotten this question like so many fucking times, but like, I don't care. Essentially, what mechanisms would stop a charismatic, intelligent, and fanatical individual from monopolizing their local economy into a highly stratified plutocratic autocracy or any variation thereof, if a state is non-existent and only small decentralized communities remain? Because ideology is a powerful tool.
Yeah. I mean, basically, you're giving the classic neo-feudalist argument, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of already answered a lot of those in previous questions. If you kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together.
My bad.
No. It's fine. I'm just explaining to everyone, right? So what I would say is that I don't think that the incentives for monopolistic tendencies are stronger in anarcho-capitalism. I think it's the exact opposite. Now, is it possible, right, that a fanatical, charismatic person is able to become the sole proprietor of a community? It is possible. It is also possible that America falls to a sole charismatic individual. And I think many on the left were sounding those warning calls when Trump was elected, maybe a little bit over the top. But I think that could happen in any society, right? Anarcho-capitalism is not perfect and it's not impervious to corruption. I'm not arguing that, like, I'm not arguing this Marxist take that, like, once the world is educated on class consciousness, then, like, the need for private property will disappear and we'll all live happily in the new utopia, right? Like, what I'm arguing for is a set of principles that a society should organize itself upon, because those are the most moral and the most efficient systems that exist. Robert Higgs would say, just because your house is on fire, you don't neglect to put water on it and put the fire out just because the house could light on fire again, right? Failures in this system could indeed happen. That being said, I don't think the incentive structures are there to make that very likely. And I would say that it is less likely that that occurs under a system of free market enterprise, voluntaristic contracts, and a society that recognizes the sovereignty of the individual that is philosophically just so much different than our own, as opposed to democracies that I think are so easily captivated and taken over by charismatic leaders, because the system itself is designed for a charismatic leader to be able to gain power in such a way.
Okay, but I mean, you haven't really like mentioned what mechanisms would stop such a person from rising to the topic. It could happen. You said that monopolistic tendencies wouldn't really be as pronounced under anarcho-capitalism as under our current system. Why?
Well, the judicial system favors those with large amounts of capital. The tax system favors those with large amounts of capital. Regulatory capture occurs because large companies are able to hire people once they get out of office that are supposed to be regulating them for large salaries. I mean, probably the most famous example was the FDA creating a label for OxyContin and then hiring the very person that made that label at a $400,000 a year salary, right? The subsidies and the regulations are almost always written by large corporations, and creative destruction is much lower in our current capitalist system because of the amount of wealth that is taken out through inflation and taxation, et cetera, as well as intellectual property laws that allow large corporations with a lot of capital to be able to buy up the property rights of creation and manufacturing of products of their competitors. I think all of these things, as well as the existence of corporations and bankruptcy laws and proceedings, I think all of these
buying loyalty, right?
Yeah, exactly. All of these things, right, are designs of our current system that help support monopolistic tendencies, and none of these things exist under free market capitalism.
All right. Go
ahead.
I'm sorry, you were gonna finish, or?
Well, I mean, I was answering that short question, so that I feel like that's a pretty extensive and exhaustive. Without going too into detail of how these things do that, I think we can all assume how those things do that.
So essentially, you said it's essentially buying. Our system is built upon built around the idea of buying, loyalty, right? That's what you said.
That is
in short.
I wouldn't necessarily say it's built around the idea of buying loyalty. I would say it's built around the idea of buying the means to rig the economy and use state power and violence to protect their companies at the expense of everyone else in small businesses. I think it's a lot more than just loyalty.
Wouldn't that still be even more likely without a state to regulate these bad actors in a stateless, market society? I mean, you're still. No. I'm not trying to be rude here, but you're still not really making any sense.
No, it wouldn't, because what I just described to you was the way that the state actually doesn't regulate. What the state is actually doing is propping up these institutions, right? So it's the exact opposite effect of what it's intended to do. What it actually does is benefit large corporations that write the regulations and then give them to senators and House of Representative members. They don't even read these bills. It's not because one senator wrote a 2,000-page bill. It's because a lobbyist that came from a company gave them a bill and said, this is what you should do. And they were like, oh, I trust you guys. And then they literally take it and copy and paste that shit. It's these large companies are writing the fucking laws we live under.
But I mean, you don't need a state to prop up capital. I mean, capitalism has shown itself time and time again to be such a incredibly efficient system at generating wealth. Even if the wealth, goes to the top and barely anyone else benefits from it, because
right, but the top changes very often, and the more creative destruction you have in an economy, the more the top changes, right? So I'm not arguing that income inequality wouldn't exist. I'm simply arguing that those who are at the top and those who are at the middle will constantly shift from generation to generation. Under a free market system, there's a lot more competition that is occurring.
Well, I mean, so long as they don't ally themselves with one another into an oligarchical structure, I guess that could work. But I really still fail to see how that wouldn't happen given enough time. Given enough of a power vacuum. Yeah.
So cartels. Economic cartels tend to be pretty ineffective. The best example of an effective cartel has been OPEC, right? OPEC is probably the best example. And you can see from OPEC's own consistent and regular failures that they can only ever really maintain their grip on oil prices and oil production for very short periods of time. Often what happens is the incentives grow for one of the people to break away from that system. And when they artificially lower prices and things like that, they hurt themselves. And so it's very easy for one person to break away. And when they artificially raise prices, they increase the economic incentive for new players to come into the market. So I think really just an understanding of how, just an understanding of how economics works without a state that has a monopoly on power and violence and is able to set the rules and create subsidies and things of that nature shows that I think that capitalism, while it does accrue wealth at the top, creative destruction constantly replaces who's at the top and who's at the middle. And it's a lot more difficult to maintain things like cartels than people think it is. Because the incentives are just in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I don't really want to hold up this conversation too much because there's probably a lot of people that want to talk as well. But just a final question: cartels under such a power vacuum, if in their best interest, of course, would most likely not stay cartels. They would most likely try to expand their power. I think one of the anarchists that touched upon this was Brian Morris. He essentially argued that given the emphasis on private property and these big corporations and stuff that would exist under such an anarcho-capitalist system, essentially replace the state with private security firms to further consolidate their power from cartels to something greater, and essentially slowly create like I told you this neo-feudalist system, right?
Yeah,
So
well, Brian Morris is usually doing talks. He's an anarcho-syndicalist, right? And if you know anything about ANSINs and ANCOMs and ANSOCs, they fucking hate us because they're anti-capitalist, right? So there's a lot of incentive there, right, to kind of misalign and lie a little bit about what it is that ANCAPs actually advocate for. So he has very little discussion on how rights enforcement agencies and cultural cohesion and covenant communities and a lot of the systems that we talk about in a free market system to regulate the rules of the game, if you will, dismisses with those in an attempt to create a narrative of neo-feudalism. And a deeper look at what structures we believe will be instituted kind of tells a little bit of a different story, I would say.
yeah, I get the ideological friction and everything, I really do, but I mean that still doesn't really counteract or answer the question. But
right, yeah, well again, if you were here earlier where I went into detail about rights enforcement agencies, private contracts, why private policing wouldn't exist in such a way, I don't want to rehash that for everybody that's kind of been here, but yeah, I'm streaming and you can maybe go back and check out the VOD and get the whole the from beginning to end, maybe if you want to learn a little bit more. Or you could join my Discord. There's a ton of people that love to have discussions about it.
Yeah, all right. I will. I'm gonna cede the conversation to somebody else now. But yeah, I like to read a lot about economics and politics.
Awesome.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, next question is going to be from Gus. The question is, how does fear affect politics and people's decisions and how they think society should work?
How does fear affect people's decisions and how they think society should work? It's an interesting question, and I don't know the right sociological lens to take here. I will say that conservatives, when we look at moral landscape theory from Jonathan Haidt, right? And we look at things like disgust mechanism, what we can knowably know is that nation states that during pandemics, not obviously the coronavirus, but we look at African nations, for example, when you have a rise of sickness, you tend to have a rise in conservatism. Why? Because the personality differences of conservatives and disgust mechanism show it's the same idea of like discuss with like whether or not someone who's cooking your food is washing your hands. That is a huge difference between left-wing voters and right-wing voters. Right-wing voters are far more likely to be grossed out by certain things like germs and stuff like that. And that likely comes from personality trait conscientiousness, which you may, if you believe in 10 trait personality psychology, you may break up into orderliness as well as industriousness. And that's that orderliness kind of portion of that trait. So I think fear tends to, the more fear you have, the more you tend to have nationalistic and in-group preference, right? More fear tends to lead towards more nationalistic ideas. And it tends to lead towards like America first kind of idea, as well as racial in-group preference, as well as more authoritarianism. Less fear tends to lead towards more openness of a society, which tends to lead towards more left-wing policies. Of course, this gets ever more complicated when you start talking about left-wing authoritarianism, right? But in terms of how does fear affect elections from a sociological perspective, I think I'll stick with my answer in the sense that I think the question is what type of fear, and are we talking about left-wing individuals from a personality matrix, or are we talking about right-wing individuals? Maybe a more pointed question I could give a better answer.
Sure. Well, Gus is willing to speak directly to ask that point of question. So, Gus, whenever you're ready.
Oh, hey, what's up, Gus?
Gus? Are you there? Mic issue. They got him.
They got him. Fucking Glowy's got his ass.
How about now?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, that's better.
There we go. Okay. Man, I forgot my follow-up because of the mic issue. I'll try and remember it. I believe it was how do you think fear affects people's view on anarchism specifically? And do you think their fear of the responsibility leads them to want a state?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think voluntarism, Georgism, anarcho-individualism, and anarcho-capitalism, right? So kind of the traditional right-wing anarchistic things absolutely stress individual responsibility far, far more than the left-wing variants. And so I think when people are afraid, they do tend to accept authoritarianism a little bit more because they'll trade their freedom and their liberty for security. And I think there's another confounding variable here, right? And I think that is trust in the institutions, right? So while fear may lead people to believe in authoritarianism as a means of getting security, I think as things get worse, people also lose trust and faith in the institutions. And I think this can also work in the opposite direction, leading people towards more libertarian ideals. Which of those wins out? I think history has shown us that it tends to be authoritarianism, unfortunately. But if we change as a culture and we change as a society, that balance may tip in the other direction, where fear and uncertainty and lack of trust in the institutions may lead us towards more individualistic and freedom-orientated society.
Well, that answers my question perfectly. I'm not going to hold up. I'll talk to you later, man.
See ya.
Awesome. Okay. Well, next question is going to be from
conservative communism. Yes.
The question is, considering for the last 70 years, America has built a weakened individual, would there be any type of social safety nets for those who have been tricked into this fallacy that the state should take care of them, i.e. welfare, Medicaid, and Medicare?
I guess I don't understand the question. Would there be? There already is. Maybe you could reformulate it.
Yeah,
I guess I'm missing something.
I think what Todd is asking is, so if we were to get to like an Ancap society, or an Ancap, structure, in this society, would there be something like a welfare or Medicaid or Medicare to help those kinds of people who?
Yeah. I actually have a YouTube video on this, sort of tangentially. The YouTube video on my channel is just go into it real quick. It's one of the few that I actually have, which is how to provide public goods without a state, Richmond Trade Association and Ancap model. So no, there will not be taxation and there will not be a welfare state. That being said, when you have situations like homelessness or things that require some level of charity, I go through in that video how it is conceivable that a company could find what is known as a market void, right? So when the state is taking care of something and it's no longer doing that, there's a void in the market has been created. And so there's an opportunity for a company to make money in congruence with the fact that people have a desire to, let's say, not have homeless people on the streets, right? To not have problems in their society. And so what can happen is churches and communities can step in, and then a company can come along. And what the model does, and the video goes into a lot of detail, but basically the idea is I start a company getting all these charities together, getting donations, and trying to, let's say, open a homeless shelter or a food bank of some sort or something like that, or some type of program to help people get off the streets, or et cetera, right? And then what I do is I create the Richmond Trade Association. I go to different businesses and I ask for their money. As the company is able to grow, then what I do is I host a charity event, let's say a folk festival in town. And I go to companies and I say, if you want to, let's say, sell your goods and services at this event, like a food truck or something, right? Then you need to pay for that. And it's all for charity and you should do that, right? Like you should be willing to do that, right? And what I do is I give them a sign to put in their window. And then people go to this folk festival and they're like, oh, this was hosted by this charity organization. And the next time they're in town, they see that sign in that window and they're like, hey, I remember that. It triggers good memories, ideas of helping and things like that. And it automatically makes this company look better. As the company grows, right, then the company can get to a point where it can put exclusivity in its membership process, right? And by doing that, it can not only give more opportunities to those companies, so long as they are a member, in looking better and in having business connections, et cetera, but also what it can do is it can say things like, you're not allowed to be a member unless you pay your employees this certain amount of wages. You're not allowed to be a member unless this percentage of your products are produced locally. You're not allowed to be a member unless whatever it is, the moral systems that company enforces. And then you're able to grow in such a way. And then as you grow, you attempt to find more market voids. And this is also how a society could get rid of what's known as the free rider problem. So this company could essentially build a flood wall or a levee, and then use those levees as a means of advertisement for their company. And then the company can grow, et cetera. So while I don't think you're going to have a system of taxation voluntarily, I mean, it could happen, right? Where people all voluntarily choose to do some type of tax or something, and they live in that community. That could happen in, let's say, an HOA or something where everyone signs a contract to do something somewhat democratically and have taxes and stuff like that. But so long as people can divest from that and move to other places, et cetera, that gets kind of complicated. But I do think that what will likely happen is organizations and companies, along with community involvement, will have to step up where the state steps out.
Okay. Todd, I hope that answered your question. Next
thank
person
you,
we're going to go
Tylenol,
is,
as well as thank you,
Faf
Ben
over
Sport,
RV.
for the follows. I
He had
appreciate
like a
it.
semi-question, semi-statement. So RV, whenever you're ready.
All right. Here it is. Hey, what's up, dude? Definitely agree with like 95% of what you're talking about, and yeah, I'm glad you're versed because some of this stuff will get me to mauled when people are not. My question is, would you? I'll just go with the question, and then if we need expansion on it, I'll go there. Would you agree that many of anarcho-capitalism and libertarianism's solutions, predicated on natural competition and spontaneous organization, are represented in inferior forms today, but are basically inherent in human society? If you need me to expand,
Yeah,
on it,
I need you to expand.
That is to say, as an example, police departments currently compete to not be corrupt, or rather to outperform one another across various metrics within, like, the state, society. But if we removed the statist-derived entities that convolute this competition, it would actually benefit policing overall. As an direct and pragmatic example, removal of union clout the blue shield effect, and qualified immunity to force officers to dot their I's and cross their T's.
Yeah.
What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree mostly. I'm not so sure that I would agree that these are inferior forms of competition ingrained in our society. Maybe it's just maybe the wording is something that I don't necessarily like. But I would agree with the concept as a whole. Absolutely.
Yeah, the reason I use inferior is because that is to say inefficient.
Yeah, I would just say it's something so corrupted that it's different.
Right. I believe today's unions, by and large, are a good example of something that maybe had the intention of efficiency. Sure, whatever. But they are inefficient. They get in the way of this competition that I do believe is, as a libertarian, is spontaneous, natural, and that the order emerges spontaneously through that competition. So I see things like these giant all these big union bureaus that get in the way of this competition being just bore out to the public so that the best can rise to the top.
I think unions, I think the heavy usage of the word union requires me to expand on my belief on that a little bit. I would say more so that unions today are almost nothing like what unions used to be, and that they function essentially as different operations of the state. I don't see any IWW wobblies in these unions anymore. I don't see any wildcat strikes, right? Like I don't see any unions using full. You do see a little bit, but no. By and large, you don't see heavily democratic union representation and things like that. What you have is unions that have been corrupted by the political system to such a degree that they are essentially defunct and useless, and they barely fight for their people at all. Now, obviously, the Fritos union was doing a pretty good job for them, right? There are examples of unions that do great things and good work.
Throughout history, yes.
But honestly, they've just become a wing of the Democratic Party, and they don't do shit for people anymore.
Right. Yeah, and so that's all I like to highlight to everyone else too. And I like FL Scott. This guy is good.
Also, private sector unions are cringe because you're not representing workers against a property owner. You're representing workers against a government that taxes people.
It's like a contradiction. It's almost like a contradiction.
It's like we should get rid of all private sector unions. Your union is the ballot box. Like, fuck out of here with you fighting against an organization that has the right to steal money from me. Like, exactly. It's not their money, it's mine.
What I can appreciate the most about everything you've said is you keep the principle of the individual pretty much sanctified, and that's very important in libertarianism, so I appreciate you.
I appreciate you.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Hervé. Next question is going to be from... we'll go with you. So monopolies can only exist because protections from the state. In other words, you think it's impossible for monopoly to form if there was no state?
No. I think it is highly possible, however, much less likely. Now, here's the thing, though, about a monopoly. So, the problem is we often conflate monopsony with monopoly. Right? So we often conflate the idea that someone has a majority of the market share with someone having exclusivity of the market, right? A monopoly means that there's exclusivity in the monopoly. Now, there are three types of monopolies that exist. There is efficiency monopolies, there is regulatory capture monopolies, and then there's what's known as a natural monopoly. Right? So let me explain. A natural monopoly would be, let's say, a new ore of metal is discovered that can be used in making batteries 1,000 times more efficient. But it's only been discovered in one mine on the entire planet, and one person owns that mine. That is what's known as a natural monopoly, right? Because it is a commodity or a resource, right? And no one else is able to compete because they own this one specific resource. Regulatory capture monopolies occur when the state subsidizes or creates the rules in such a degree that creates a monopoly, right? So
Section 230.
Right, Section 230 is
Yep.
Section 230 is
Sorry,
one.
I had to. I'm sorry.
But I mean, you could look at this in history with the trains, right? Like, you know, the you know, prior to this, both before and a little bit and certainly after the Civil War, right? The state was creating a monopoly within the railroads because of the system of how they were structuring the taxes, et cetera, et cetera. It was essentially impossible for anyone to compete because of the way the state interfered in the market, right? And then the last type of monopoly would be an example known as an efficiency monopoly. So this would be Standard Oil, for example. Standard Oil at the beginning, when they first got into the market, kerosene was, I want to say it was like it's $27 a barrel, right? At the very peak of Standard Oil's monopoly, kerosene was less than $5 a barrel, right? Why did this occur? Well, part of it was some shiesty shit he was doing, right? But for the most part, it was an efficiency monopoly because he had come in and actually hired accountants to go through his company like rigorously to the point where every single nut and bolt was counted. They created new systems of manufacturing that were highly efficient. They reused the barrels. They reused chemicals and sold those chemicals in other ways, the byproducts of manufacturing kerosene. They made their oil cleaner than everybody else, right? And they were so good at it and that people would start up new companies to compete with them just in the hopes that that Standard Oil would buy them, right? So two of these are possible under anarcho-capitalism. Without a state, you really can't have regulatory capture, but you can have an efficiency monopoly. An efficiency monopoly tends to die off over time, especially once you get rid of intellectual property rights, because intellectual property rights allow them to be able to companies to purchase out their competition and not allow anyone else to be able to manufacture and compete with them. Now, in terms of a natural monopoly, that is something that is a problem essentially no matter what system you're dealing with. That being said, again, I will say that necessity is the mother of invention. If there is, for whatever reason, a very rare resource and only one person owns the property rights to it, what will likely occur is that it will be incredibly cost prohibitive if they charge too much for it. They will gain a lot of money by this discovery, but it will also cause a lot of other individuals to try and find ways to compete with this situation. And creative destruction always occurs, right? Many people would say for a time period that Blockbuster was the king and had an effective monopoly on the market of renting DVDs and VHSs, and they were the big company. And like, you know, you had your local VHS store, and it was so sad to see when your local VHS store got bought out again by Blockbuster, and Blockbusters everywhere, and like, how are they ever going to go away? And then this little company had this retarded idea, oh, pardon my French, if anybody's streaming or whatever, had this stupid idea, right, that they were going to mail DVDs to people, and it took them like a month to get there, and you never got the movie you wanted, and sometimes you actually got the wrong movie, and the DVD was so scratched to hell, and it was the dumbest idea anyone ever came up with. And this little company was called Netflix. And then one day they launched Netflix.com and started hosting all these things on the internet. And that was the death of Blockbuster. Creative destruction in the marketplace is so much more likely to happen under free market capitalism because the state effectively taxes 40 to 47% of all of our wealth. Once you add payroll taxes, property taxes, corporate taxes, Medicare, Medicaid, and then you also add taxes that come from fiat currency, which is designed, this is another thing I didn't talk about with all these monopolies, designed to make sure that the wealthy can put their money in passive income, but that inflation devalues the currency and disincentivizes spending and growth from the poor and the middle class. Once you have all of those systems and also most companies, the average company in America operates on a 7% profit, right? So when you realize that 41 to 47%, depending on the changes in the tax structure from year to year, are being stolen from us, and they're operating on a 7% margin, you realize that a much more free market system without wasting money on all these other bullshit programs that don't pan out, or wasting money on bombing children in other fucking countries so that we can make weapons industries billions of fucking dollars, right? Once we stop wasting all of this money, you're in a situation where creative destruction and entrepreneurship is way more incentivized, and these companies can be destroyed far more often by the system of economics that always picks the best good and the best service based off of people's desires, and that's just how the economy structure works. And it's not how it works under a state system that is so utterly corruptible.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you for that answer. I have a question now.
Go ahead.
The question is,
hey, thanks for the follow, Kirby Campbell.
It's too inflammatory. So, because this is something that I hear from like lefties all the time, right? Not just lefties, but primarily lefties, and it's something that I hear from people who propose maybe not Ancap communities, but like a self-governing like style of government, or like a self-governing style of community where like they don't have civil rights protections and whatnot. In fact, I think here in California, I forget what it was called. There was like a project by a bunch of like white nationalists where they're attempting to put together like a town similar where they could keep out all the non-whites and have like a specifically white area. Is there like so you don't seem like I don't know you very well, but you don't seem like a white nationalist type.
No.
But if you had
I'm descended from black slaves on both sides of my family.
Right. Yeah. So if you had this kind of like ANCAP style of government, right, or society, like presumably you could have communities like this popping up that are specifically meant for white people, specifically for black people or Asians or whatever it is, that are keeping out other members of other communities. Now, do you think there's anything inherently wrong with that? And if not, is there anything within an ANCAP society that would keep something like that from happening, or is it something you should even worry about?
So long as your rights are not violated, I don't give a fuck. You want to make an all white town and you don't sell property in your town to black people because you hate black people? Cool. All the racists can go live in their own little fucking racist town. I'm not going to go there to eat. And the only reason I'd get out of my fucking car in that town is to go to the gas station as I'm driving through it. So long as freedom of association, and this is Lenin, by the way, also means freedom of discrimination. You should be able to freely trade and associate with whoever the fuck you want. Now, if you refuse people's rights to freedom of movement, if you aggress upon them in some way, if you make it impossible for them to be able to travel in some capacity, then yeah, that's violence, right? And so we need to deal with that violence. But if you simply live in a neighborhood and you build a neighborhood, let's say 10 miles outside of town, and you have an HOA and you have a little like company store and like a couple of little things, and part of the agreement when buying a house in that neighborhood is that you must be white, and you're not allowed to sell it to anybody other than white people. I have no problem with that. I mean, morally, it seems gross to me. It seems like those might not be people I want to hang out with. But they should have every right to be able to create a society where they live with people that they want to live with. They're probably likely going to face some financial incentives in the other direction, because I can imagine plenty of companies would not want to do business with them, which could make it more expensive for them to get products and goods and services. But ultimately, if they value their own ethnic cultural cohesion more than the negative incentives of purchasing more expensive products that they're not able to produce themselves, then that is perfectly legitimate and fine. I don't care if they're Asian or black or white or Native American or whatever it is that they are. So long as they don't violate people's rights, there's no issue here.
Okay.
And if I go to a restaurant in the middle of town and it says no blacks, guess where I'm not eating? I'm not eating at that restaurant.
Okay, pretty straightforward. Thank
It's
you.
probably a pretty hostile restaurant.
Yeah, it's probably a shit place to eat, and it's probably an asshole. Like I'm not expecting good service there.
Right. That sounds like a really like heart racing, nervous meal.
Okay, well, next question is going to be from BTAC. BTAX, whenever you're ready.
Oh, marvelous. I'm unmuted. Okay, well, I'll preface this by saying you seem like a nice guy, and I do agree with most of your points, but while I fully acknowledge that you're not a Republican, many of the points that you've made wouldn't be anathema within the Republican Party, to some degree, deregulation, so on. At a time when getting into career politics is relatively easy, especially as the midterms approach and campaigns are looking for staffers, instead of giving AMAs to terminally online Discord sociopaths, why not propagate your ideas within the party system where I'm confident you'll find greater success? Or, to put it another way, how about you stop LARPing on Twitch and get a real job?
I appreciate the question that is also loaded with insults. I will say this. While there are plenty of things that are more closely aligned within the Republican Party than, let's say, the Democratic Party in the United States, there are plenty of things that I find anathema and evil about the Republican Party. We often say that Republicans or conservatives are just progressives going the speed limit. I don't find that they ever really hold up to the principles, and they mostly just pay lip service to liberty-minded individuals. A great example would be a recent House bill that was signed on by 70 Republicans that wanted to create a federal database of vaccination status, right? These people are strange bedfellows sometimes, and more often than not, they are working with the corporate powers and interests to be. And in many ways, I think we have a one-party system in the United States where we pretend that we have two parties. So no, I don't want to work with Republicans. As a matter of fact, I have the personal email and a direct line of communication with someone in my state politics that has been the Speaker of the House multiple times, and is often referred to as the shadow speaker, because he really runs Virginia Republican politics and has offered me a job before with him. I could go do that, but it is against my principles to do so. The reason I engage online and let's say present more radical ideas is because I think choosing the lesser of two evils is still choosing evil, and what we should be doing is engaging in meaningful praxis and hoping to educate people, and hoping to push for ideas that are ours. And I am also I wouldn't say heavily, but I am a member paying due of both the Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus. I am sometimes active in their Discord, though their Discords are kind of dead, and I will be going to Glen Allen at the next Mises Caucus meeting.
Do I get to come back? Is that?
Yeah, of course. Dude, yeah, say what you want to say.
Okay. Well, I didn't have a full question answer for it. Yeah. Okay. So I do understand what you mean about picking the lesser of two evils is still evil. And I do also know what you mean about trying to sort of educate and build a base, as it were. But at the end of the day, somebody does need to be the conduit for your ideas. And that conduit really should be you. It's not a case of I'm going to be the educator, and I sure hope that someone I educate, steps up to the mark and runs as a representative.
I mean, also, for the record, someone from our community has run for office, and we have had interviews with them, and we have gone through our community and found people and looked through the local election laws and had people doing phone calls for them, as well as putting them forward, and encouraged others to do so. I'm simply trying to do what I think I do best, which is as someone that is a somewhat decent communicator and a fairly decent debater, I'm trying to normalize anarcho-capitalism within the Twitch politics space. And that seems to be where I might be most effective. And I encourage people to do what they are individually most effective at doing in terms of spreading this liberty message. If you disagree and you think I'd be a better politician than a Twitch streamer, maybe I'm simply wrong, but my self-assessment would say otherwise.
I just personally think that your capacity to influence policy would be better suited, within a party system rather. Even if you were voicing your opinions to 100,000 people on the regular, you would still see more real policy change inside the system.
Well, Robespierre during the French Revolution might disagree, right? Sometimes the pen is mightier than the sword.
Right, but it would be a pen. It would be your pen in the party system.
The legislative pen is the sword.
It's okay.
In this analogy, I get what you're saying.
You're the sword.
I don't want to be the sword. I want to be the pen.
Right now, it's the sword. Yeah, I'm telling you to be the pen. Okay. No. All right. No worries. That's enough questioning for me. But yeah, you seem like a great guy. So best of luck to you.
Well, I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, BTAX. Okay, next question is going to be from Ash. Ash, whenever
Jura Nolman, let's go.
Hello, how's it going?
Howdy.
All right, so I won't waste anyone's time.
You're already wasting my time. Disgusting.
I am a well-known minarchist on this server, and I immensely respect your dedication to the NAP. However, first of all, tell me what's your opinion on minarchism and how would be
Ancaps? Us Ancaps have a joke. What is the difference between a minarchist and an Ancap?
Yeah.
6 months. That's my position. I think constitutional minarchism is a position that I held myself. I read Robert Murphy's Chaos Theory, and I was defending anarcho-capitalism so much because my friend was an ANCAP, and I eventually felt that the most principled position I could take was anarcho-capitalism. At the same time, my channel's name is Fabian Liberty, and we get Fabian from the Fabian Society in England. We believe in incrementalism and libertarian ideas and policies to slowly change the culture so that one day in the future we can realize anarcho-capitalism. Just like Benjamin Tucker advocated for individual action and changing the culture, as opposed to Herr Most that advocated for apparently bombing and protesting with violence. I think the right-wing anarchists have always been in a position of attempting to influence through education and cultural shift and change. So I have massive respect for minarchists. I don't look at some ANCAPs that, get like all fucking, their panties in a wad fucking about, you're not technically principled and fuck out of here with that, right? Like, you're the closest thing that there is to us. And I understand. Yeah. I mean, the writer of the Anarchist Manifesto, right, Belguru, himself argued that a nation state was necessary to protect private property rights and defense from foreign invasion. I respectfully disagree, but I totally understand your position, and I think it is a fairly moral one, and I think we should obviously be working together because, our goals over the next 20 or 30 years are essentially exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, we can shoot each other when we dealt with the communists, but anyways.
That would be a violation of the NAP.
Okay, hold on. I'm not finished, but basically, the minarchist position that I'm going to put forward is we both... ideally, we believe that liberty comes from protection of the NAP. Basically, if you're not aggressed against, if you're not imposed against, you have liberty, right? So,
but I would consider the state a form of aggression.
Of course, absolutely. Look, minarchists believe that taxation is theft. Minarchists believe that involuntary subscription to a state is obviously a violation of the NAP. However, we also believe that every other possible outcome has more violations of the NAP. So it's kind of like a weird, I hate the word utilitarian, but it's like a utilitarian compromise to achieve the maximum NAP possible, right? Because if it's like complete anarcho-capitalism, of course I believe it lasts about 5 minutes before someone violates the NAP and it's the warlords all over again.
And you know what? I will respectfully take the exact opposite position, which is I think if you have a perfectly voluntary state, the state will cease to exist. I don't think anybody, like when really, if we really get to that point and we have a voluntary tax system and a voluntary state, you're going to see the absolution of the state, and you're just going to see anarchism. But we'll just agree to disagree on that.
I mean, sure, yeah. I mean, absolutely. Like for the next, I think libertarianism is in a good position. I'm seeing everyone understand these principles, these moral principles, more and more every day.
Mm-hmm.
And
you see the right calling themselves libertarian, even though they're not, and you're seeing the Mises Caucus absolutely, utterly destroy the Prags.
Yeah, and I believe that for the time being, for the foreseeable future, even like the actual liberals, like the classical liberals and everything, we are all on the same umbrella against fascism and socialism.
Well, fascism is a form of socialism, but fair enough.
We are in the same camp, so it'll be an honor to fight alongside you in the battle for liberty.
Well, I'm glad to have you.
No, thank you. That's it.
That was unexpectedly wholesome. So the next question is going to be from Sea Turtle. It looks like multiple questions. So it is, how would workers in an Ancap area be guaranteed the wage they need to survive? I know that the regular argument is that the workers can quit and find a job that supports them, but in some cases that is impossible, such as if one corporation has gotten control of companies in a single area, maybe if they bought up smaller businesses, or if a bigger business can employ people willing to work for less. How could individual workers be able to guarantee a living wage?
So when you say a living wage, number one, the welfare state's gone, right? So if a company is not willing to pay me a living wage, I'm not willing to work for them. There's no reason to work for less than a living wage because it would literally be impossible to do so. It is not possible to work at a company for less than a living wage unless I'm subsidized by something else. If the state is not subsidizing me, then that must mean that there is mutual aid and praxis within your society in order to counteract those effects. If you have mutual aid and praxis within your society to counteract the effects of companies that are not paying a living wage, then that means that you have a society that is at least somewhat partially aware enough with enough power to be able to counteract those effects. If that is the case, then that means there is enough of an informed population to start their own businesses and let that business go out of power. So the very presuppositions of the question themselves under an anarcho-capitalist model prove that it couldn't occur.
Okay. Pretty straightforward. Sea Turtle, if you have any follow-ups to that, let me know. The next question is from Q+. Q, if you want to speak, you can. Go for it.
Oh, Q. Oh, goodness.
What's up with it? So, it's proven now that, Hillary is all involved with the Russian hoax now. It's all projected on the Trump, but now it's all a lie against him, and it's all true for Hillary. So, how do we even trust these people now? The people that are still saying that it's still Trump's fault, when it's proven that it's their fault.
Who's they? What's their fault? And what are you talking about?
Well, this Russian hoax that that Clinton says that that he's meddling with the Russians. It's really Hillary Clinton meddling with the Russians and through the White House when Obama was president.
Yes.
And now they're still saying that that they basically didn't do anything wrong, that it's still Trump's fault. So how can we trust what they're saying when it's proven right here that they're doing this stuff?
Welcome. I'm an anarchist. I hate them all. I hate all politicians. All of them.
Do you think some of them are telling the truth? I believe some of them are.
I'm assuming some people are telling the truth, but they also have negative and corrupt incentives, and they probably don't know half of the shit that's going on, because I would assume that individuals that are doing the really corrupt shit are probably have forms of shit tests, and they probably don't. Like, Rand Paul is not in the fucking know on some of the deep, dark shit, right? You know what I mean? During the Reagan administration, when we were fucking funding the Iranian civil war and using that money to assassinate democratically elected Sandinistas in Nicaragua so that we could protect corporations like United Fruit Company that became Chiquitas, and the fact that that is still occurring today, where large corporations are paying for right-wing militias to murder people if they dare protest against their companies, while poisoning them with chemicals that we knew were poisonous and deadly in the 1970s, right? Like, the entire system's fucking full of corrupt people, right?
Yeah,
Nancy Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, right? He's making fucking millions trading in such a way that proves that he's doing insider trading if you just fucking pay attention even a little bit. These people are all fucking corrupt shitbags. We're anarchists. We hate them.
Okay. Bribes and blackmail, highest levels.
Thank you, Q.
All right, well, yeah, thank you.
Okay, love you. Bye-bye. The next question is going to be from Basemaker. That question, whenever you're ready.
I'll start with one of the questions I had. What did I write exactly? I wrote, what does anarcho-capitalists think about ecological harms? If there is a profit motive, what's to say that all land isn't going to be commodified, i.e. no more national parks and a massive loss of biodiversity?
Yeah, so again, a negative externality that causes harm, such as pollution, right, is something that we believe is harmful and companies should be put out of business for. Now, when you're talking about deforestation, for example,
how can we I
don't see, the thing is that capitalism isn't this situation where only it represents the values and interests of the people, right? And so it is the individual responsibility as well as the collective responsibility of a society and a culture, right, to influence and incentivize things in such a degree that what you're buying is what you want, right? You know what I mean? Like we all wanted, like, people don't want to admit it, but we all wanted porn available on our cell phone at any second of the day, at all days of the week. And that's why the fucking internet blew up so massively, because of porn, right? If it wasn't for our desire for porn, we probably wouldn't have the internet technology and web infrastructure that we have, right? So there's all kinds of externalities that affect one way or the other. I would say in terms of the environment, I think there are plenty of people within our society that are motivated for environmental protectionism in some degree or another. And another thing is that anarcho-capitalism is not a vision I have for the world. Anarchism is a vision I have for the world. Anarcho-capitalism is just the one that I want to live under, right? If I advocate for anarchism, and anarchism means anarcho-socialism, anarcho-communism, anarcho-mutualism, anarcho-individualism, Georgism, and even
guys can't have fun anymore.
Libertarian socialism. It just so happens to be that all the Twitch streamers, that call themselves libertarian socialists are usually just fucking commies by a different name. That being said, and even classical Marxism in a certain way, right? Like, live under the society that you want to live under. And a great example of this would be, again, Chiron, Mexico, which has been anarchist since 2011. And since their instantiation and their breakaway from the Mexican government, not only have they not had a significant crime since 2015, they've also planted 3,000 hectares of forest, and they drove out the illegal logging corporations out of their area and have been healing the forest. So, maybe if the whole world was anarcho-capitalist, it might present some environment to the danger, though I'm not sure that the market incentives would actually do that in the long run. But I don't necessarily advocate for anarcho-capitalism. I advocate for anarchism, and where I want to live, and the most moral system that I think is the most right to me and my principles is anarcho-capitalist.
All right, that's a pretty decent answer. I'm sure a more ecologically radical person could keep questioning you on that, but I'm not that crazy about it. My earlier question that I wanted to, it's like a line of questioning I want to go down. I want to hear your answer and maybe ask a question back. So like,
come on, Socrates, let's do it.
Yeah. So like, is social capital a form of government?
No. Why is social capital a form of government?
I asked, do you define it as such, or?
I don't understand how you could define it as such, and that almost to the point where I'm wondering what you mean by social capital.
Right. So,
as far as I understand it,
like
go ahead.
An idea of preserving like natural habitats, like that having social capital is what I mean. Ideas and ideologies in a form of society as being a part of like literally the fabric of that society. Is that a form of how that society is governed?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I apologize.
What I'm trying to I'm gonna be frank. What I'm trying to say is when you use the I'm not very red on this to be honest too.
Mm-hmm.
But like when I hear somebody mention social capital will hold like a lot of sway in how anarchist societies will form.
Mm-hmm.
I just see that as a proxy for government. I see that as a proxy for whatever ideologies and whatever thing that's going to fill the power vacuum of whatever we have now.
I don't advocate for that. When I say you need social capital, what I mean is the strict sociological definition, right? Which is that communities, right, are engaged with each other, know each other, right? So a form of social capital would be, let's say, you live alone in your apartment and you don't talk to anybody, and you have a job, and then we take someone else that has the exact same situation that you're in, right? Same job, same money, same property ownership, et cetera, et cetera. You own the same car, except this person goes to church every Sunday, right? Let's say your car breaks down and you don't have enough money to fix it. Well, the guy who goes to church every Sunday knows a bunch of people and may be like, dude, my car broke down. Is there any way you guys can help me out? And like, I'll help you out, et cetera, et cetera. Or they have more friends, right? Because they know people from church and they have a large list of friends and we're like, hey buddy, can I borrow like $150? I need to put my car in the shop. But if you live alone and you have no friends, you don't have any social capital. So you don't have any friendships that you can leverage to help you in a situation of need. That's what social capital is from the strictest sociological definition. I'm not talking about like social cohesion in a democratic sense.
Yeah, I get the term. So like something in a form of like mutual aid, which is what some people have been advocating for.
Yeah. I mean, mutual aid is an important thing when you lack governmental institutions, that people help each other out, because there's no one else to help them out.
Right. That would. I see the benefits of that quite literally, actually, but yeah. I guess that's all the questions I can.
Social credit score.
I don't know what else to ask you.
Fair enough. I'm sorry. Maybe my answer derailed because of the terminology.
No. It's more like, as I said, like if I was more of like crazy about ecological matters, then I'd probably be like nitpicky and try to get you to answer more about it. And if I was like if I truly, because like I still think that like some part of anarcho beliefs can't live without the form of governance, a form of ideology that is like not as vast and expansive as a confederation of states, but like a government nonetheless. And what that is, it can be up for the anarchist societies of the world to decide in the future or something, but what I'm saying is, like, I don't think anarchism, from what I understand, is a critique and not a way of like living.
Gonna Jack, hop into the politics Discord if you have a question.
That's just me.
Or wait until afterwards.
New questions.
Fair enough.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Basemaker. The next question is from one of our admins, a local Tesla show. He wants to know what you think about Elon Musk.
I think that Elon Musk is often based, but I also think that he has a massive amount of money and he is really irresponsible in the way that he engages in the market. But I also kind of feel like that is this bullshit system of the market that we've set up. In terms of what are his goals and things like that, I appreciate the entrepreneurship and the kind of the autistic single-minded focus. I'm a little bit conspiratorial in the sense that I think that like maybe his real goal to go to Mars is actually just to develop the technology for mining cobalt on asteroids and in other places, and that it's not really that he wants to be a seafaring or a spacefaring kind of like civilization so much as he just wants to be like an insanely powerful, wealthy individual mining all the fucking cobalt. Other than that, I would need a more specific question.
Okay, so Ariel, if you have one of those, just let me know. If not, we're going to move on to the next question. The next question is from Virgin Incel Nationalist Commie. That question is, what's your ideal way of enforcing the NAP or any local law contract? Yeah, that's it. So
yeah, I feel like we've gone through that several times in here, right? It's rights enforcement agencies, insurance. Now, there is an interesting thing that we haven't delved into, which is a big debate among the anarcho-capitalists, which is what do we do with these criminals beyond financial restitution that are violent, right? Do we banish them? Do we create like some type of house arrest bond system like they had in the Icelandic Tain system, right? Do we imprison them? Is prison ethical? And the real answer there is that honestly, I'm not sure. This is a pretty deep debate within all of the anarchists, right? I personally would prefer that individuals that are incredibly... There's also the idea, which is that rights enforcement agencies simply choose not to protect the rights of individuals any longer, which means that they are liable. They are kind of, in a true anarchist in the pejorative sense, living in a world where they have no protections of their rights. But I think there would likely be organizations that step in on those accounts. And so I don't think that that's actually an effective solution, because I think you would have, bleeding heart liberals were always going to exist. They're going to be like, dude, that's fucked up, and would protect those rights out of a sense of charity. So I don't know the answer when it goes that deep down the questioning, which no one has made me answer it, but I'll be fair and open about the holes in my theories and where I reach the limits of my understanding. And so that's what I'll say about that. But in terms of the original answer, obviously rights enforcement agencies, arbitration and things like that. But the most severe punishment for the most severe crimes, is something that is a hot debate within the ethics and philosophy of anarcho-capitalism.
Okay. Well, speaking of being open and honest to critiques of your ideology, Patty's question is, in conversations I've had with Marxists/socialists and communists, I find them to be extremely dishonest interlocutors. They speak in generalities, they obfuscate, and they tend to blame others for the failures of their system. Why do you think that is?
Because it is Hegelian Marxist materialist dialectics, and being able to lie is a integral part of their philosophy. It is not a rational philosophy based upon the search for truth, but instead it is informed by a presupposition of oppressed oppressor dynamics. From a Marxist perspective, it is class. Then you get the instantiation of cultural Marxism, not the fucking quote unquote they conspiracy theories, but actual cultural Marxism, which is applying these ideas to cultural issues, that is then invented in the Frankfurt School. And then when you look at the idea that they are then influenced by people like Marcuse that think that the ends justify the means, is kind of the ethical basis of Marxist and socialist philosophy in the sense that they are not deontological. They do not have principles. What they have is a system of belief of dialectics that says that there is oppression, that we must deconstruct that oppression when we see it, and then we must reorganize the state while maintaining this and re-educating individuals, and then by reorganization, it will magically disappear. And because it's anti-rationalist. So I think it's much deeper than just the politics. It gets into the philosophy, and you'd have to have a long conversation. And honestly, if you can stand it, an objectivist is usually the better people to talk to on these issues, though it can be difficult talking to psychos. But it really comes down to the philosophy.
Okay, great answer. Next question is going to be from Alu. Alu, whenever you are ready, you can speak.
So my question was just like basically hypothetical, but here's my question. My neighbor has rerouted a decent sized stream that cuts through both of our properties. It's brought down my property value, and it's, don't have enough water for my crops, which I was using the flow to help with that, right? He hasn't acted aggressively, hasn't threatened me, hasn't taken any foot on my land. What do I do? Who do I contact? And what are my options?
So first, you're saying under anarcho-capitalism, and second, the very beginning where you set up, all I heard was like stream on my property, like you were cutting out a little bit, and so I don't want to engage. Could you re-explain that?
Yes. My neighbor, essentially what I'm saying is that like your neighbor has rerouted a stream on his side of the land that has cut through both of your properties up until that point. Mm-hmm. However, he has not touched your property explicitly. Yeah, so there are different theories on water, right? So the interesting thing about water and about air and things like that is a really good essay you could read to get these ideas is by Hans Hermann Hoppe, Common Public and Private Property and the Rationalization for the Total Privatization of Property. The thing here is that the stream as it exists is common property, right? It is not owned by anybody in this instance, assuming that there isn't a private property owner of the water, right? And so when someone privatizes that stream, right, by doing transformational labor, right, let's say by building something to reroute the stream to make it more efficient for him, he is financially responsible for what was lost to you. What was previously common property has been transformed into his private property, but he must maintain the common property rights because you previously had access to that water. So by doing so, he either has to pay you forever the financial changes that occurred, or he has to work out in some way or capacity a means by which of giving you the same access of water that previously existed. Knowing this and knowing that system and knowing that he's financially responsible for these things, it would be a really dumb idea for him to simply reroute the water, but we may instead be like, look, if I reroute the water to make my crops, I then have to like transport water to you. Like, how about we work together on something and we'll draft up a contract where we both own it and we'll both put in money and we'll build a more efficient system for both of us. But if he simply steals what is essentially your ability to gain water, he's financially responsible for that because he has changed the common property that you once held into his own private property and denied you your common property rights. So let's say, for the sake of the question, that he is stupid and he does the perceived stupid thing and reroutes it anyway, right? And this now goes to the point of I have to do something. Now, I'm assuming there's a private security form, and from that point on, my question is, how are they funded?
Right. So you would contact your rights enforcement agency. Your rights enforcement agency operates just like insurance. You pay a monthly fee, just like you would for car insurance in the event that something happens. So you pay a monthly fee for your rights enforcement agency. Let's say you're not paying for a rights enforcement agency, which is a dumb idea. It's about as dumb as not having car insurance, right? But let's say that is the case. There will likely be charitable organizations that engage in things like this, and lawyers that do pro bono work and stuff like that. But if you're behaving in a way that is sensible, you're a rational actor, you're going to have a rights enforcement agency insurance policy. When this occurs, A rights enforcement agency contacts him or his rights enforcement agency and files a claim, and it goes into arbitration. If something can't be resolved first, and then once it goes into arbitration, that is paid for by the rights enforcement agency as well as your representation, and then they will look to resolve the situation. Be that he pays you something, but what is more likely is that he has to pay for some way to get your water back to you, or deconstruct what he constructed, or build something that routes at least a partial amount of water to you, et cetera, et cetera. It depends upon the specifics of the case and how the lawyers will handle that. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't go into much more detail than that.
Okay, so I have one last hypothetical question for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I have fallen through the cracks in some sort of way, I don't have a good head on my shoulders, I'm a bad capitalist, right? I'm shit, I'm soy, right? And I don't have like the currency to pay my dues, monthly, yearly, whatever it is, this insurance, this private security force. Presumably, I'm much more at risk to predatory behavior, right? Yeah. Presumably, the person who is rerouting my river knows this, right? There are no social services in that Capstan, right? So my question is, what happens when you fall through the cracks? Do you go? Can I sell myself in indentured servitude? What is my solution?
Well, so
I'm not good
two
with
examples.
my money. There's no digging myself out of this.
So 2 examples, right? That I can give you from our current system. I'll give you one that's a narrative example, just because maybe it helps sell the thing. And then the other one, which is just a real situation. Plenty of people today don't have enough money for representation in court, right? And yet there are charity organizations all over the United States, and you can quickly do a Google search and find tons of them, right? Where for individuals that make under a certain income bracket, they can get legal advice and help in pro bono work. So assuming you're an idiot and you have to go through that system, that's unfortunate, but that is what we'll have to do. The second thing, which is a story. Just before Christmas, when I was in 3rd grade, my father promised me the year previous that he would get me a go-kart if I got all E's on my report card. And I never got all E's because I was a terrible kid and I was super ADHD and I was disruptive in class, and he didn't think I could do it. But you know what? I was properly motivated because now I was going to get a go-kart for Christmas, and I was like, fuck yeah, let's go. And I got all E's. I behaved, proving that I could behave, that I just didn't want to. And so my dad was like, all right, for Christmas, we're going to get you a go-kart. And then he did a job when he was running his own business for doing cabinets and countertops. And he was doing a job. He got paid half up front. And what ended up happening is he built the cabinets and he did everything but install the cabinets. And the rich guy knew that he didn't have enough money to meaningfully defend himself in court. And so he simply stole the cabinets and refused to pay him any more money or let him in the house. And it completely destroyed his business right before Christmas. And so my response is, things like this happen all the time in our current system. And I'm not outlining a perfect system. I am simply outlining a system that follows the morals and principles to the best of their ability that I think will be overall better if you choose to look at this from a pragmatic angle. But instead, I look at this from a deontological perspective of what is right and what is wrong. And the current system is wrong, and this is a system that is right. That doesn't mean that people don't get fucked over by bad people. It happens. But I think that this would be a more efficient system of having that happen less often. And I think that this system would have things like charity in those events. And also, everyone is going to know at this point that you need to have a rights enforcement agency. That would be the best answer I can give you.
Yeah, I'm one of those dirty Marxists that Patty was talking about, so I'm not going to dispute that the current system has these issues. I know I said that was my last question. I just have one very quick last one. Don't you think that charities, as we know them now, this willingness of charities to distribute goods, resources, and general goodwill, don't you think one of the major pillars of that is the tax incentive?
I think it's the exact opposite.
To say you think it's the exact opposite?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that large individuals do give, large capitalists do give money to charity organizations as a means of hiding their money in certain regards and paying less taxes. That absolutely does happen. But I also think that the completely corrupt and inefficient system of government that we have, and the amount of taxes that are taken away from everyday people, disincentivizes charity organizations to a higher degree than does tax subsidies for wealthy people that donate to charity. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you seem like one of the more reasonable, articulate ANCAPs that I've met. So, props to that. I'm done though. You're good.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Talk to you later. Next question from Hunter Biden. How is dialectical materialism anti-rational?
Yeah, so dialectic materialism, Marxist materialist dialectics, is anti-rational because the search for truth is not off of an objective means, but is instead based upon a presupposition. And then based off of that presupposition, you look at institutions and attempt to deconstruct them. It is a change from Hegelianism because it believed that Hegelianism was able to say that we reached the current systems via a rationalist way, via the via the dialectic process. And Marx thought that this was supporting the status quo, therefore it must be wrong, and instead presupposes the oppressed oppressor narrative as an instrument of the Marxist materialist dialectics, and ignores rationalism as well as liberalism at its very core as part of the process. One may be able to argue that Hegelian dialectics isn't per se anti-rationalist, though it is anti-objective, and it is based off of it is anti-objective and anti-Newtonian in its structure. And so I would say that most right-wing philosophers would heavily disagree with that, but Marxist materialist dialectics is just provably anti-rationalist, and there's just really no way around that.
Okay, great answer. The next question is going to be from Alcastrophobia. You're unmuted whenever you're ready.
What is that a fear of?
I was actually just looking that up. I don't think he's ready. Okay, I'll ask it for him. The question is, or actually, why don't we just hop to somebody else really quickly? We're gonna go to Gojnak, I think. If he's ready. He's not ready either. God damn it. Okay. Oh, wait. Even better. Hunter Biden wants to refute you. Hunter Biden, you're unmuted whenever you're ready. Your mic's lighting up, but we can't hear you. Yeah,
is it working?
Yeah, you're good now.
Go for it.
Oh, sweet. Okay, yeah. So you said like it was,
and you're gone. There you go. You're back.
So you said it's not looking for the truth, right?
Yeah, I don't believe that it is.
Because
no.
I would argue that the presuppositions that Marx and Engels put forward actually is the truth.
If you're a Marxist, I'm sure you would.
Hold on. It's looking at reality the way it is, and not the way you'd want to look at it, right? If we had a society of all rational men, then your society could work out, but we don't.
Yeah, I don't think that is a really? Scientific or truth-seeking process in any way. Because you don't find the truth by starting with presuppositions.
But the presuppositions,
that's anti-rationalist and anti-scientific.
No, it's not. It's looking at reality.
Okay. Well, we're just going to have to agree to disagree because I can't imagine.
I mean, what do you disagree with Marxism? Like the specifics. What do you disagree with?
Well, I disagree with labor theory of value. I disagree with his economic theory.
Why do you disagree with it?
Because we had the marginal revolution. So we just know that it's wrong. Because it proved labor theory of value wrong.
How did it?
By proving that we had marginal product utility, and by proving that wages and prices are not set based off of a universal system of value that is labor, not just because different skilled workers have different labor, but also because, as you add additional laborers to your workforce, marginality proves that individual workers can be hired at one price, but as you add additional ones in, the lowest common denominator changes because, for example, like to give an example, let's say you're at a restaurant, right? And you hire a janitor and the janitor's only job is to clean the bathrooms. That's worth a certain value. But if you hire a second janitor, the second janitor and the first janitor can't be paid off of just the value of cleaning the bathrooms, but they have to be paid off of the value of cleaning the bathrooms and taking out the trash. Taking out the trash is worth less than cleaning the bathrooms, and therefore the labor costs change by adding an additional labor. That's probably the best way to, and you could take that on, so on and so forth. And also the fact that people are sick, and so you have additional labor to fill up for other things, right? So economic theory has just gone past Marx, and it's just wrong.
I mean, I don't think that disproves it. They employ more laborers. How does that disprove it?
What do you mean? How does that disprove it? I just explained that. It disproves that there is a universal theory, that there is a universal value to labor. There isn't.
So are laborers, are they paid the exact value of their labor?
Not always. I mean,
why not?
Because that's not how supply and demand works.
Well, Marx
value, yes,
you act like you just had this one theory and somehow, everything fits under this one blob, but that's just not true. He accounted that there were other variables.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's why Das Kapital 1 and 3 are different.
He talks about supply and demand. So how was he wrong?
What do you mean? Because he talks about supply and demand, that somehow makes labor theory of value work.
That's another variable.
I'm not here to debate economics with a Marxist, right? Like, if you have a specific question, ask it. But if you're asking me to turn this into a debate with you about Marxism,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like we can get into that. Like, I do plenty of blood sports.
It just seems like misconceptions to me. I mean, everyone throws these things at Marxism.
Okay.
Well,
I have no idea what that has to do with Marxist materialist dialectics, but okay.
Another time then. All right, it was nice.
I'm sure Scott's open to speaking to you some other time on the stream or something.
All right, sweet.
Maybe.
See you, Scott.
Okay, thank you, Hunter. Okay, next question is gonna be from this alcastrophobia guy. Again, I looked it up. It apparently doesn't exist, so I got tricked.
That's fine. I don't know what he's talking about with why he wants to now talk about supply and demand and how that has anything to do with Marxist materialist dialectics.
Okay, cool.
Would you argue for the point that young people understand socialism as it is today and what it was in its infancy in terms of their historical knowledge surrounding it and overall upbringing, to the point of that type of knowledge is known to them? And why would they be drawn to that message?
I'm sorry, and I know this is going to seem. I'm not trying to be rude, and I don't want to, and I'm not trying to say anything. But I thought at first you were doing a Jordan Peterson impression, and
what do you want?
And I got slightly distracted, and I didn't quite understand your question. Could you repeat it? I apologize.
I'm rather offended to that.
Okay, but could you repeat the question?
You know what? I don't feel like it anymore.
Patty, please.
That was rather uncalled for.
All right.
Absolutely.
It's okay. It's my fault. So do you want to ask your question again? Your voice is beautiful. It's okay. Sir? Sir?
I'll need a moment.
It's okay.
Someone's clearly memeing against me.
Well, while you're gathering yourself, I'm going to ask another question, okay? Okay, thank you. So the next question from Ganja.
GKZ01
I actually thought this was like the first question we were going to get. I was very surprised. I didn't see this until now.
Mm-hmm.
This person joined from Twitch just to ask this question. Right?
Okay, let's go.
What are your thoughts on age of consent laws in an Ancap society?
I'm not going to funnel this question over to Vosh because we disagree, unfortunately. Yeah, so what age of consent is a really interesting question, because what we're really talking about is when is an adult an adult? When are they fully capable of making the decision to consensually have sex with someone? Now, that would be based upon their consciousness, but the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until around 24 to 26. And I don't think there's anybody here arguing that the age of consent should be 25, right? That being said, I think 18 is a fairly decent number. What is the perfect number? I don't know. It's certainly not, it's certainly not fucking under 16. That being said, I think you have to also play into account whether or not an individual is harmed. So being able to prove harm is a big aspect of this, right? So, a 16 and a 17-year-old, I highly doubt there's any harm occurring there. But, a 35-year-old and a 16-year-old, you may be able to prove some harm. The real thing here is that the parents are custodians of the rights of children until they're fully developed and able to be a conscious being capable of making their own rational decisions. And so what a society chooses as the right age of consent for that, and what the common law will be based on around that, and how the society will deal with that, is something that is certainly up for debate. But there are definitely nefarious actors. I don't know that I know too many of them in anarcho-capitalism. It wasn't us that came up with terms like minor attracted persons, for example. It was the left that came up with a lot of those things. It wasn't us that were intentionally putting children in the foster care of pedophiles. That was Germany until 2003 and the Marxists. So, I mean, I do understand that it's an internet meme and that it seems to be the one that gets lobbied against us because the occasional Ancap comes out and says they want to do away with age of consent laws to trigger people. But yeah, so I think it depends on how we psychologically define harm and how we psychologically define a fully conscious adult. Obviously, no one within anarcho-capitalism is advocating for fucking kids.
Wow. Okay. Thank you for that answer. Next question. I want to try our friend Castrophobia again. You there, mister? You better now? Do you want to ask a question?
Well, all right. Well, to summarize it, I'm asking you, why don't young people understand socialism?
Well, I think socialism is such a wide doctrine with so many roots in so many different directions. I don't think that most people understand any political ideology. You know what I mean? So understanding it requires, what is the arbitrary limit of knowledge to where you can say that someone understands something, right? You know what I mean? Like young people don't.
Well, that would put forth the argument that almost anything is something you can't understand, right, to a full extent.
Yeah, exactly.
But you need at least some basic sort of knowledge towards it.
Well, I mean, young people.
So why don't young people understand that?
Because young people grow up socialist. Right? I mean, the family dynamic for the most part is socialist.
I'll get the vaccine.
Right?
You fucking leave me alone.
Well, because the mother and the father, make sure that
me.
goods and services are equally redistributed. The school system tends to be fairly left-leaning. Teachers tend to be fairly left-leaning. And most of these kids haven't gone out and done much with themselves as an individual entrepreneurial. Most of them haven't paid any significant amount of taxes, and they haven't had to pay a lot of bills and things like that, right? So of course, socialism sounds nice.
That. As soon as they leave, as soon as they get pushed out of their home, they'll be put in that environment. And what are they gonna do?
Grow up? I don't know.
No. They'll be put on the streets.
Why would they be put on the streets?
Because I said so.
Oh, God. Okay, well, thank you for the question. I am, good luck putting those people on the streets. Next question is going to be from, we've been going a little bit over 3 hours.
Yeah, this guy is doing an amazing Jordan Peterson
fine, but
impression.
I think that eventually I'd like to put this on YouTube, and I don't think that in case you wanted to put it on YouTube or whatever, I don't think people want to listen to a 4 or 5 hour video. So why don't we start wrapping it up? I'm gonna ask a question, because my question is way better than any of these weirdos.
Of course it is.
It's about so when the first time I interacted, oh my god. So I interacted with you on a Prime K's Twitch panel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was about.
Thanks for the follow, Zazie and
the thing that I had the most contention with during that panel was something you said about voting. Mm-hmm. And it kind of, as happens in debates, people get a little hyperbolic and they restate your position and they're really uncharitable, and it ends up becoming something it isn't. Yeah, thanks, guys. So yeah. Anyway, so what that eventually turned into was people saying that your belief was that today in our current system, it is immoral to go out and vote. Now, can you just kind of expand on that and what you meant by that a little bit?
So I'll start with a little bit of an anecdote, a little bit of an argumentation, right? That I like to use to usually predominantly left-wing people that believe in socialized healthcare, right? I say, okay, let's say you vote for socialized healthcare, right? You vote for whatever presidential candidate and senators and House Representative members, and there's this giant progressive blue wave in the country, and you vote in, let's say, Bernie Sanders or whatever, right? Or maybe even someone more radical on healthcare than Bernie Sanders. And instead of a public option, what you get is full-blown Canada, UK version of healthcare, right? And you're like, yay, you voted for that. That was what you wanted, and you're so happy that you got that. And let's say, for whatever reason, something happens and the culture shifts dramatically, and a bunch of right-wingers get voted in. Right-wing president, red wave a couple years later, right? And now we have a predominantly Republican Senate, House, and presidency. And what they say is, instead of getting rid of socialized healthcare, what they do instead is they make hormone replacement therapy, gender reassignment surgery, and all puberty blockers illegal and not paid for by the current health system. What you need to understand is that by voting for socialized healthcare, you voted to take away trans people's rights. You own that, and you must own that, because you gave the government the power to do as such. And so this is the problem with voting for the lesser of two evils, is that you are voting in support of the system as a whole and the power of the state. The only moral vote that you can have, at least as far as I'm concerned as an anarcho-capitalist, is to vote for someone that will dismantle the systems of the state in some capacity, who is anti-war, who is close to your principles as possible, but more importantly, must reduce the power and the purview of the state. And even then, if they institute governmental growth in some capacity, you are responsible for whatever is done from that governmental growth. So the only way to ensure that you are not engaging in an immoral act in any way, shape, or form is to not vote. Because it is potentially immoral if anything the government does is grows in any capacity in the way that it is, because the state is in and of itself immoral. It is a system of violence that is used against people, extracting their wealth and imposing rules and restrictions based off of both the tyranny of the majority as well as these corporate and corrupt institutions. I personally will never vote for someone because I think it is immoral unless it is a protest vote to show that I'm dissatisfied with the parties. It is a vote for someone that is extremely unlikely to get elected, such as a libertarian candidate, but instead will push both of the parties to take a more libertarian perspective in the hopes of gaining some of those voters in the next election. Or a candidate that is specifically running on and is a proven track record of dismantling state systems in some capacity. That is my position.
Okay, thank you. Next question I've got is kind of in the same vein. So you seem pretty new to the, I don't know how active you've been on Discord or debate bro type areas, right?
Yeah.
But you seem pretty new to like Twitch and to like YouTube. I mean, I think your oldest YouTube video is like 6 months old or something like that.
Yeah.
First Twitch stream I saw was like 2 months ago.
Yeah, I've been on the platform for not quite 7 months.
Okay. And I'm wondering like what has your experience been like? Twitch, I mean, because I can tell you what my experience has been like as someone who's not a lefty on Twitch. It seems like a very like how do I say this? It's a space full of people who aren't used to interacting with people who disagree with them about anything. And I'm wondering if you've had similar experiences. And there's a lot of people who talk about like the toxicity that exists on the right, and I think that's a real thing, right? Right wingers can be very toxic, but I don't think enough people talk about how that can exist on the left. And I'm wondering if you've run into any of that since you've gotten into Twitch and YouTube.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The thing is that my political ideology usually puts me batting heads with any political ideology, right?
Right.
Leftist anarchists gatekeep, scream that we're not anarchists because we have hierarchical structures and that we need more democracy and that democracy is anarchistic. And I disagree with them, and then they just at me. Conservatives don't like me because I like to talk shit on cops, and I like to call them socialists. Lefties obviously don't like me because they tend to be fairly anti-capitalist, and they think that that Vosh's Coconut Island is actually a good analogy. So I kind of get hate from everybody, but I'm used to it. I enjoy it to some degree. Maybe I'm a bit of a masochist in that regard. But I came into this space knowing that anarcho-capitalism was essentially a meme, brought forward by hyper autistic economists and edgy teenagers, right? And so I kind of knew that was going to be my space. I don't really go out that far into a lot of other spaces. I often get banned the moment my name appears in chat. And on these platforms, especially in debate panels, you can see the chats, right? Like the hosts love having me because it brings in views, because everyone loves to yell at the Ancap, and I happen to have really good arguments. But most of their chats get extremely incensed that I'm allowed there, and yet they're all hate watching. So yeah, I mean, I would say that Twitch is predominantly a left-wing platform in terms of the Twitch politics, but that's probably due to the fact that, the first superstars within the Twitch politics space were all, socialists or democratic socialists, right? I would say Twitch in general is probably more right-wing than it is left-wing, because gamers tend to be, they tend to be white men, predominantly in America. Even not to say that like white people game more than other races, but just that the majority of the population is white and the majority of the gamers are dudes. And so I would say that Twitch in general actually leans a little bit right wing, and that the politics space just tends to be very left wing. And yeah, there's a lot of toxicity. But I think that is just more reason for people to share streams and to grow, and that is really just a time issue than it is an actual issue of Twitch. I mean, obviously TOS is somewhat left wing in the way that it's constructed, because of it's the protection of certain forms of speech and things like that tend to go against right wingers than it is left wingers. But even still, so long as people are careful and they're not like ridiculous with their speech and stuff, I think eventually this will even out to a certain degree. And yeah, I think the left will actually become less toxic as more right wingers show up, because I think what is occurring now in the Twitch politics space so far that I've seen, I'm certainly not an expert, but it appears to me that without any like challenging right wing kind of stuff, there is a lot of like lefties gatekeeping and biting at each other. And that as more prominent and stronger right-wing individuals show up on the platform, they'll be less inclined to battle each other and a little more inclined to battle them.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. I think it's a great answer. And I think, I don't know, one thing that's kind of surprised me, getting into like Twitch shit, because I've been on Discord for like years, right?
Mm-hmm.
The server has been around for years, and we have people of all stripes on the server, right? Everything from like anarchists to like full-on fascists and like ethno-nats and whatnot. And I feel like my goal in interacting with Twitch is to like try to pull some of these people who I feel like are in an echo chamber, if they're like watching Destiny all day, or Hassan, or whoever else. They're getting his views and they're regurgitating his views, right? That's primarily what they're doing in these chats. They kind of build up a parasocial relationship with these people, and they go around regurgitating their positions and following the relationship drama and all this kind of nonsense. And I think it's extremely unhealthy. So I just got to say that, like, I really commend you for jumping in with these people, because I know it can be extremely toxic. People have been trying to dox me for years for having this server. People have been trying to get this server taken down for years.
Well, obviously it's because you took down your competitors, you evil hacker.
Yeah. And it seems like, I mean, I guess in some ways I can understand it. Politics is, we're talking about the use of power, right? And how power should be like, how should be used in society and against and upon people. So I can understand people being like passionate and whatnot. But I feel like it's really difficult to even interact in these spaces if you have an unpopular position or on anything, because you're gonna get the fucking hate swarms after you. And I've had them after me for years. I'm sure you're getting them after you now.
I've gotten death threats already. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But I think there's a few things to recognize here. One is, we have plenty of studies that show that the left is in a worse echo chamber than the right. And people will never believe it, but it's just a fact. And the reason it's a fact is because right-wing people can't escape left-wing values. Social media websites tend to have left-wing enforcement. Media tends to be left-wing. Hollywood and television tends to be left-wing, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas left-wing people can very easily avoid right-wing stuff. And so there is something to be said about right wingers kind of breaking through in that space and getting into these spaces and, challenging these ideas. And often, especially when you get into the deeper cuts, these are ideas that they've never heard before.
Right.
Or even facts and statistics that they've never heard before, because, as, was it, oh my God, who was it? Was it Dickens that said there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics? Right.
Yeah.
You hear a different statistic, and some of those even become memes and labeled white supremacists or something. Right. There's a lot of that going on, but I think it's important that we break through. I forgot what the other point I wanted to make was, but oh yes. So I think it's just as important as it is to, as a content creator, it's important to understand that this is an entertainment platform, and that you do have to engage with the memes and you do have to trigger people and stuff like that. But it's Mark Twain. Thank you. It's also important that you use the clout, I guess, that you gain, or the notoriety, to then have conversations like these, right? To have AMAs, to have one-on-one conversations that are more rational and things like that, and let your hate watchers kind of come to you, right? Because if you're always going out there to challenge people's ideas, then you will always be seen as a combative enemy. And I think it's just as important to be a combative enemy as it is to let then hate watchers come to you and have a rational conversation with someone that you agree with or, maybe slightly disagree with, and have a bit of an interplay and have a complex conversation. I think the new N word in these spaces sometimes is nuance. And I think we need to recognize that and battle against it.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you just said. And like I said, I commend you for jumping into Twitch. I know how toxic that community can be. And I appreciate you coming in here and talking to some of our people. Because I think what tends to happen is people will build up caricatures of belief systems and ideologies and what people who hold those belief systems and ideologies might look like. And after interacting with, even though we disagreed about everything when we were on that panel, I felt like you were somebody who genuinely understood what you were talking about and could put forward the ideology in an honest way that people can understand. So I really appreciate you coming on.
And honestly, I'm still a neophyte in some of these spaces. I mean, I'm a bit of a theory head, but naturally, and I've been obsessed with politics for forever. But there are definitely smarter people out there when it comes to anarcho-capitalism. A lot of them. But most of them, unfortunately, are terrible communicators. So apparently it falls on my head to be able to communicate these ideas to normies. You just watched a clip from our Twitch channel, Fabian Liberty. If you like content like this, please like and subscribe here on YouTube, or go ahead and give us a follow on twitch.tv/Fabian Liberty.